The wind cut through Sweetwater like a dull blade. Slow, but it got the job done. Victor Hale felt it against his face as he stepped off the supply wagon, his boots meeting mud that hadn't dried since spring. Around him, the town sprawled in a graceless scatter of wood and canvas, clinging to existence the way a wounded animal clings to breath. He'd seen worse. Hell, he'd been worse. The war had ended 8 years ago, but Victor still carried it in the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes moved before his head did, cataloging threats that weren't there anymore. Or maybe they were. Different kind of threats now. Hunger instead of bullets. Loneliness instead of orders. He hadn't planned on staying in Sweetwater, hadn't planned much of anything since Appomattox, but his horse had thrown a shoe, and the blacksmith had looked at him with that particular expression, half pity, half calculation, that meant the repair would cost more than it should. "Take you 2 days," the blacksmith had said, wiping his hands on a rag that might have been white once. Maybe 3. So Victor had found himself with time to kill in a town that seemed to be dying just slow enough that nobody had noticed yet. That's when he saw her. Alara Voss stood outside the general store, arms wrapped around a crate too heavy for her frame, her dark hair escaping from pins that had given up hours ago. She wasn't beautiful, not in the way men usually meant it. Her face was too angular, her mouth too wide, her eyes the kind of gray that looked like rain about to fall. But there was something in the way she held herself, something that made Victor stop. Pride, maybe. Or stubbornness. Hard to tell the difference. "That's Alara," a voice said beside him. Victor turned to find a man in a dirty suit, the kind that had been expensive once. Town clerk, maybe, or a failed businessman. The type who talked to fill space. "Widow, husband died in the spring. Consumption." Victor said nothing. He'd learned that silence made people nervous enough to keep talking. "She's been trying to keep the store running, but..." The man shrugged. "Town's got opinions about a woman running a business alone. About her in general, if you want the truth." "I don't," Victor said. But the man kept going anyway. Her husband, Marcus, he wasn't from here originally. Brought her out from Ohio, some say. Others say Kansas. Nobody really knows. And she doesn't talk about it. Doesn't talk much at all, actually. Keeps to herself. Makes people uncomfortable. Victor watched Alara struggle with the crate, her jaw set, refusing to ask for help even as her arm shook. Finally, she set it down harder than she probably meant to, and something inside made a cracking sound. Her shoulders dropped for just a moment, barely a second, before she straightened again and lifted the damaged crate anyway. "They're saying she'll have to leave soon," the man continued. "Can't run a store, can't pay her debts, and no family to take her in. It's a shame, really, but that's how it goes." He said it like it was weather. Inevitable. No one's fault. Victor felt something stir in his chest, something he'd thought died years ago. Not quite anger, not quite sympathy. Something in between that didn't have a name. He crossed the street. Alara didn't look up until his shadow fell across the crate. When she did, her eyes went wary immediately. The look of someone who'd learned to expect the worst and was rarely disappointed. "I don't need help," she said. Her voice was lower than he expected, steady. "Didn't ask if you did." She blinked. "Then what do you want?" Good question. Victor wasn't entirely sure himself. He looked at her, really looked, and saw what the town saw. A woman alone, running out of options, too proud to beg and too worn down to fight. But he also saw something else, something that reminded him of himself, someone the world had finished with. "How much you owe?" he asked. Her expression shuddered immediately. "That's not your concern." "Store's failing?" "It's managing." "You're managing," he corrected. "There's a difference." Alara's mouth tightened. "I don't know what you want from me, Mr. Hale. Victor Hale." "Well, Mr. Hale, I appreciate whatever chivalrous impulse brought you over here, but I can handle my own affairs." "I'm sure you can," he paused. "But you're not going to. Handle them, I mean. Not the way things are going." It was cruel saying it straight like that. But Victor had learned that cruelty and honesty often wore the same face, and he was too tired to dress one up as the other. Alara's face went pale, then red. "You don't know anything about me or my situation." "Know enough. Widow, no family, business failing, town's already written you off. That about cover it?" For a moment he thought she might slap him. Her hand actually twitched, but instead she did something worse. She laughed. It was a bitter sound, empty of humor. You certainly don't waste time on pleasantries. War taught me time's too valuable to waste. Something shifted in her expression then. Recognition, maybe. You were a soldier. It wasn't a question. Victor nodded anyway. Which side? Does it matter? Not really. She looked at him differently now, like she was seeing past the surface to something underneath. So what do you want, Mr. Hale? If you've come to deliver bad news, I already know you've wasted both our time. This was the moment. Victor felt it like standing at a crossroads, each direction equally unclear. He could walk away, should walk away. He had his own problems, his own ghosts. Taking on someone else's made no sense, but sense and survival were different things, and survival, he'd learned, sometimes required doing the thing that made no sense at all. I'll marry you, he said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Alara stared at him as if he'd spoken a foreign language. Excuse me? You need money, security, someone to keep the vultures off. I need... He paused. What did he need? A reason to stop moving. You're insane. Probably. You don't even know me. Don't need to. You work hard. You don't give up. That's more than most people can say. Alara shook her head slowly, like she was trying to clear water from her ears. This is absurd. We've been talking for 5 minutes. You can't possibly... I can, Victor interrupted. And I am. Think about it. You get to keep your store, your independence. I get a purpose. We help each other survive. Nothing more complicated than that. Nothing more... She laughed again, that same bitter sound. Marriage is considerably more complicated than that, Mr. Hale. Doesn't have to be. Not for us. He met her eyes steadily. I'm not offering love, Mrs. Voss. I'm offering a partnership, a practical arrangement between two people who've run out of better options. It was the honesty that did it, Victor thought later. If he dressed it up with pretty words or false promises, she would have said no immediately. But the plain truth, brutal as it was, that she recognized. Alara was quiet for a long time. Around them, the town continued its slow collapse, people moving through their routines like actors who'd forgotten they were performing. Finally, she spoke. I have debts, significant ones. I have savings, not much, but enough. The town will talk. They already are. I won't be... She hesitated. I won't be a traditional wife. Didn't ask you to be. She studied his face, searching for something. Deception, maybe. Or hope. Victor offered neither. Why? She asked quietly. Why me? Why this? It was a fair question. Victor thought about lying or deflecting, but in the end he gave her the same truth he'd given himself. Because I'm tired, he said simply. Tired of drifting. Tired of no one needing me for anything. And because when I look at you, I see someone who's still fighting when everyone expects you to quit. That's... He shrugged. That's worth something. Alara's eyes went bright just for a moment. Then she blinked it away and straightened her shoulders. All right, she said. All right? All right, Mr. Hale. I'll marry you. God help us both. Ahmed. The ceremony happened 3 days later in the town clerk's office. The same man who'd gossiped about Alara to Victor. He performed the service with poorly hidden surprise and undisguised disapproval, rushing through the words like he was afraid they might change their minds. Alara wore a gray dress that had been black before sun, and washing faded it. Victor wore the same clothes he'd been wearing when he proposed. Neither of them smiled. When the clerk pronounced them married, they shook hands like business partners closing a deal, because that's what it was. A deal. The town's reaction was predictable. Shock, scandal, speculation. People who'd ignored Alara for months suddenly had plenty to say about her, about him, about the whole unlikely arrangement. Victor ignored them. He'd gotten good at that. They settled Alara's debts with his savings, not enough to clear them completely, but enough to buy time. The store stayed open, barely. And then, because the store had a cramped room in the back that smelled like dry goods and desperation, they started looking for land. I know a place, Alara said one evening, bent over a rough map spread across the counter. About 15 miles north. Marcus looked at it before he got sick. It's rough land, hard land, but it's available. Why didn't he take it? She didn't look up from the map. He said it would kill him. And he was right. Finally, she met Victor's eyes. The land didn't kill him. The consumption did. But he was right that it would have broken him. It's unforgiving country, Mr. Hale. Nothing comes easy there. Nothing comes easy anywhere, Victor said. Might as well own the land that fights us. The corner of Alara's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Then I suppose we should go look at it. They rode out the next morning on borrowed horses, following a trail that disappeared and reappeared like a half-remembered dream. The land when they found it was everything Alara had promised, and worse. Rocky soil, sparse trees, a creek that looked like it might vanish in summer. The kind of place settlers passed through on their way to somewhere better. But there was something about it, something stubborn. It refused to be beautiful, refused to be welcoming, but it didn't apologize for that. It simply existed. Take it or leave it. Victor looked at Alara. She was scanning the horizon with an expression he was beginning to recognize. Calculation mixed with determination, already figuring out how to make something impossible work. Well? He asked. It's terrible, she said. I know. We'll probably fail. Probably. She turned to him then, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw something like hope in her eyes. Cautious hope. The kind that had been disappointed before, but hadn't quite learned to quit. Let's do it, she said. They filed the claim the following week. The land cost almost nothing because nobody else wanted it. Victor used the last of his money to buy lumber, tools, seeds, basic supplies. Alara sold what she could from the store. Not much, but every coin helped. The day they left Sweetwater, no one came to see them off. No well wishes, no goodbyes. Just silence and watching eyes. Alara sat beside Victor on the wagon seat, her few possessions packed in the bed behind them. She didn't look back at the town. Neither did he. Do you think we're making a mistake? She asked as the trail opened up before them. Victor considered the question seriously. Yes, he said finally. But you're going anyway. I am. Alara nodded slowly. Good. So am I. The land welcomed them with a storm. They'd barely started setting up camp, not even a proper shelter yet, just canvas strung between trees, when the sky opened up. Rain came down in sheets, turning the ground to soup and their supplies to a soggy mess. Thunder rolled across the valley like artillery fire, making the horses scream. Victor worked through it, his old cavalry training taking over. Secure the animals first, then the supplies, then themselves. Alara worked beside him without being asked, her dress plastered to her frame, her hair hanging in wet ropes, but her jaw set and her hands steady. They didn't speak, couldn't, over the storm, but they moved together with surprising coordination, Victor holding canvas while Alara tied it down, Alara steadying posts while Victor drove them into the mud. By the time the worst passed, they were both soaked through and shaking. The canvas had held, barely. Most of their supplies were protected. The horses had calmed. Victor looked at Alara, she looked back, and then, inexplicably, she started laughing. Not bitter laughter this time, not empty. Real laughter, the kind that came from somewhere deep and wouldn't be stopped. What? Victor asked, confused. Victor, this, she managed, gesturing at the chaos around them. This is our honeymoon, Mr. Hale, our first day as landowners, and we're standing in the mud in the middle of a storm on the worst piece of property in Montana. When she put it like that, Victor felt his own mouth twitch. Could be worse. How? He thought about it. Could be snowing. That set her off again, and this time Victor found himself almost smiling too. Not quite, but almost. They slept that night huddled on opposite sides of their makeshift shelter, wrapped in damp blankets, listening to water drip through gaps in the canvas. Not touching, not speaking, but aware of each other in a way they hadn't been before. Partners, Victor thought as sleep finally took him. They were partners now, for better or worse. Mostly worse, probably, but they'd face it together. The weeks that followed established a rhythm neither of them had planned, but both understood. Wake before dawn. Work until exhaustion. Sleep hard and dreamless. Repeat. Victor built while Alara cleared. He had experience with construction from the war, field hospitals, fortifications, rough shelters thrown up in hostile territory. None of it pretty, but all of it functional. The cabin he framed was no different. Squared logs, mud chinking, a roof that would probably leak but wouldn't collapse. Alara attacked the land with methodical fury. She pulled rocks, dug trenches for drainage, cleared brush. Her hands blistered, bled, calloused. She never complained, never slowed. They spoke only when necessary. Pass the hammer. Hold this steady. Watch your step. Conversations reduced to their essential elements, stripped of everything unnecessary. At night, they sat by the fire, if they had energy for a fire, and ate whatever they'd managed to prepare, usually beans, sometimes salt pork. Once, memorably, a rabbit Victor had snared that Ilara had turned into something almost edible. "Where'd you learn to cook?" Victor asked that night, surprised by flavor where he'd expected only sustenance. "My mother," Ilara said. Then after a pause, "Before she died." "How old were you?" 12. She didn't elaborate. Victor didn't push. They both had histories they'd rather not revisit. That was part of the deal, unspoken but understood. But sometimes, in those quiet moments before sleep, things slipped out. Small things. Fragments. "I was at Antietam," Victor said one night, staring into the dying fire. Ilara was quiet. Then, "Were you hurt?" "Everyone was hurt. Some of us just kept the blood inside." Another night it was Ilara who spoke first. "Marcus wasn't a bad man," she said to the darkness. "Just a weak one. He made promises he couldn't keep. To himself, mostly. But to me, too." "What kind of promises?" "The kind men make when they want you to believe in them. That things would be better. That he'd be better. That Ohio was the problem and Montana was the answer." She exhaled slowly. Montana wasn't the answer. It was just a different question. Victor understood that. He'd spent years thinking geography could cure what was wrong inside him. But wherever he went, there he was. "I won't make promises I can't keep," he said finally. "I know." There was something like gratitude in her voice. "That's why I said yes." The cabin took shape slowly. Walls rose. A roof went on. A door that almost fit its frame. Windows with oiled paper instead of glass. A stone fireplace that smoked at first, but improved after Victor rebuilt the flue. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The day they moved their few possessions inside, Ilara stood in the center of the single room and turned slowly, taking it in. The rough floor, the unfinished walls, the ceiling low enough that Victor had to duck in places. "It's not what you imagined," Victor said. "Not a question." "No," Ilara agreed. "It's better." He frowned. "How?" "Because it's real, Mr. Hale. Because we built it with our own hands from nothing." She met his eyes. "Because no one gave it to us or took it away. It's ours. That matters." It did matter. Victor felt it too, something primal and fierce. Ownership not just of land or lumber, but of their own lives, their own choices, for better or worse. Autumn came early and fast. The nights turned cold. The days shortened. They worked harder, faster, racing against winter they both knew would be brutal. Ilara started a garden, late for planting, but she did it anyway. "Might get something," she said, scattering seeds into earth that looked skeptical. "Might not, but we won't know unless we try." Victor expanded the corral, built a rough shelter for the horses and the milk cow they'd traded for, chopped wood until his shoulders burned and his hands cramped. They'd need 3 times this much to make it through winter, but it was a start. They fell into their separate spaces naturally. Victor took the north side of the cabin for sleeping. Ilara took the south. A curtain divided them, privacy maintained even in the close quarters. They'd made no agreement about this, hadn't discussed it, didn't need to. Both understood what the arrangement was and wasn't. But understanding didn't always make it easy. One night, Victor woke to sound, quiet, muffled, but unmistakable. Crying. He lay still, debating. Privacy was important. They'd both agreed on that. But partnership meant something too. Meant not pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Finally, he spoke. "Ilara?" The crying stopped immediately. Silence. "I'm all right," she said, voice carefully controlled. "Didn't ask if you were all right. Asked if you needed anything." More silence, then, "No, thank you, just Tired, it's nothing. It wasn't nothing. Victor knew that. But he also knew that sometimes people needed their pain to be private, needed to break down without witnesses. All right, he said, but if that changes, I'm right here. I know. Her voice was softer now. That helps more than you'd think. The moment passed. They didn't speak of it again, but something had shifted, imperceptibly, irreversibly. They were still partners, still practical, still careful. But they were also becoming something else, something neither had planned for, but both were starting to recognize. They were becoming necessary to each other. Winter's first real warning came in October, a storm that dropped 6 inches of snow overnight and temperatures that made the cabin's gaps suddenly feel like fatal flaws. They spent 3 days trapped inside, working by firelight to chink every crack, seal every seam. The work was tedious, and their space was too small for 2 people trying to maintain careful distance. This would go faster if you just let me help with that section, Alara said, watching Victor struggle with a high corner. I've got it. You clearly don't. You're too tall, the angle's wrong. Just let me… I said I've got it. His tone was sharper than intended. Alara stepped back, her expression closing. Fine. They worked in tense silence after that, the only sound the scrape of tools and pop of the fire. Victor immediately regretted snapping, but pride kept him from apologizing. Stupid pride. Useless pride. But there it was. Finally, Alara spoke again. Why do you do that? Do what? Push away help, as if needing it makes you weak. Victor's hand stilled. It was a more direct question than she usually asked. More personal. Force of habit, he said finally. From the war? From before. The war just reinforced it. Well, it's inefficient, Alara said bluntly. And we can't afford inefficiency, not out here, not with winter coming. She was right. Victor knew she was right. But knowing and accepting were different things. I'm not good at… He struggled for words. Relying on people. They leave. Or die. Or disappoint. Easier to just handle things yourself. Easier, Alara agreed, but not better, and not possible. Not anymore. She crossed to where he stood and held out her hand for the chinking tool. Victor hesitated, then handed it over. Alara climbed onto the chair he'd been using, still not tall enough, so Victor steadied it while she worked. See? She said, reaching the corner easily. Partnership, that's what we agreed to. Thought we agreed to a practical arrangement. Same thing. She finished the section and climbed down, handing him back the tool. Practical means using all available resources, including each other, including trust. Trust. Victor turned the word over in his mind like a foreign coin. And if that trust gets broken, Alara met his eyes steadily, then we deal with it, together. That's what partners do. It sounded simple when she said it. Maybe it was simple. Maybe Victor was the one making it complicated. All right, he said quietly. All right? You're right. About the partnership, about trust. I'll try to be better about it. Something like surprise crossed Alara's face, followed by something warmer. Well, that's progress, I suppose. The rest of the work went faster with both of them collaborating instead of competing. By evening, the cabin was sealed tight as they could manage. The fire burned warmer without drafts stealing the heat. They ate their simple dinner in comfortable quiet. Thank you, Victor said as they settled for the night. For what? For calling me out, for being honest, for… He paused. For not giving up on this. On me. Alara was quiet for a long moment. I don't give up easily, Mr. Hale. You should know that by now. Victor, he said. What? You can call me Victor. We're married, partners. Seems silly to keep it so formal. He couldn't see her face in the darkness, but he heard the smile in her voice. All right then, Victor, and you should call me Alara. I know your name. You do, but you've never used it. She was right again. He'd been keeping distance through formality without even realizing it. Good night, Alara, he said. Good night, Victor. It was a small thing, just names, but it felt significant somehow, like they'd crossed some invisible line they couldn't uncross. Not that Victor wanted to uncross it. The realization hit him as he drifted towards sleep. He was starting to care. About her, about this, about something other than mere survival. It should have terrified him, should have sent him running. But instead, it felt like relief. Like maybe, finally, he'd found a place worth staying. November arrived with teeth. The first serious snow came on a Tuesday. Not that days meant much anymore. Time had lost its shape out here, measured instead by tasks completed and light remaining. But Victor remembered it was Tuesday because that was the day everything changed. He'd been checking the trapline, a route he'd established through the sparse woods north of the cabin. Small game mostly, rabbits, the occasional fox, enough to supplement their dwindling supplies. The snow had started as flurries, harmless enough, but by the time he turned back it was coming down thick and mean. He was maybe a mile from the cabin when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not animals, something else. Victor stopped, his hand automatically going to the rifle slung across his back. Old instincts rising. He waited, listening. There it was again. Faint, but distinct. Crying. A child crying. Every practical bone in Victor's body told him to keep walking. Winter was here. They had barely enough for two people, let alone whatever trouble came attached to that sound. But his feet had already changed direction, following the noise to its source. He found them huddled against a fallen log, half buried in snow that was accumulating fast. Two children, a girl maybe 8 or 9, and a boy who couldn't have been more than 5. They were pressed together for warmth, their clothes inadequate for the weather, their faces red with cold and tears. The girl saw him first. Her eyes went wide with fear, and she pulled her brother closer. "Don't," she said, her voice shaking. "Please don't hurt us." Victor felt something crack in his chest. He lowered the rifle slowly, holding up his free hand. "Not going to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice level. "But you two are going to freeze if you stay out here. Where are your parents?" The girl's face crumpled. "Dead. Both dead. The fever took Mama last week and Papa 2 days ago. We tried to make it to town, but we got lost, and then the snow came and—" She was talking faster now, words tumbling over each other, shock and cold and fear all mixing together. The boy just stared at Victor with huge dark eyes, not saying anything. Victor did the math quickly. The nearest settlement was 15 miles south. These kids had maybe wandered 5 miles in the wrong direction. In this weather, they wouldn't last another hour. "What are your names?" he asked. "Sarah," the girl managed. "And this is Thomas. He doesn't talk much, not since Mama died." "All right, Sarah, I'm Victor. I live close by with my wife. We're going to get you warm and fed. Can you walk?" Sarah nodded, but when she tried to stand, her legs buckled. Too cold, too exhausted. Thomas didn't even try. Victor made a decision that would complicate everything. He slung his rifle back across his shoulder, then scooped up Thomas with one arm. The boy was light, too light. Victor could feel his ribs through the thin jacket. "Sarah, hold on to my coat," he said. "Don't let go, understand? The snow's getting worse and I need to know you're there." She grabbed onto his coat with both hands and they started the journey back. It should have been 20 minutes. It took closer to an hour, fighting through snow that was now coming sideways, visibility down to almost nothing. Victor navigated by instinct and memory, praying he was heading the right direction. When the cabin finally emerged from the white, he nearly wept with relief. Alara must have heard them coming because the door opened before Victor could knock. Her eyes went from him to the children and back again, questions forming and dissolving unspoken. "Inside," she said simply, holding the door wide. Victor carried Thomas straight to the fireplace while Sarah stumbled after them. Alara was already moving, grabbing blankets, stoking the fire higher, putting a pot of water on to heat. "Strip off their wet clothes," she said, her voice calm and efficient. No panic, no hesitation. "Hypothermia first, questions later." They worked together with the same coordination they'd developed building the cabin. Victor peeled off the children's soaked clothing while Alara wrapped them in dry blankets. Thomas didn't resist, didn't react much at all. Sarah tried to help, but her hands were shaking too badly. "It's all right," Alara said softly, wrapping Sarah in a quilt. "You're safe now. Just let us help." Once the children were bundled and positioned close to the fire, Alara made them drink warm water. Not hot, she explained quietly to Victor, that could shock their systems, just warm enough to start bringing their core temperature up. Only then did she look at Victor with a question in her eyes. They stepped to the far corner of the cabin, speaking in low voices while the children huddled by the fire. Found them in the woods, Victor said. Parents both dead. Fever. They were trying to reach town but got lost. Alara glanced at the children, then back at Victor. We have to take them back to Sweetwater. Someone there can... Can what? Victor interrupted. Take them in? You know how that town operates. They'll end up in some workhouse or split up and sent to whoever needs cheap labor, if anyone takes them at all. We can't keep them, Victor. We barely have enough for ourselves. I know. Winter's just starting. We don't know if we'll even make it through, let alone with 2 extra mouths to feed. I know that too. Alara's expression was torn, practical sense warring with something softer. Then what are you suggesting? Victor didn't have a good answer. Every logical argument said to take the children to town at first light. Let someone else deal with it. They'd done their part by saving them from freezing, but logic had never been his strong suit. I'm suggesting we think about it, he said finally. Let them warm up, get some food in them. Tomorrow we can decide. It was a delay tactic and they both knew it, but Alara nodded. Tomorrow, she agreed. But Victor, we need to be realistic. This isn't sustainable. I know. He kept saying that, kept knowing it. But knowing and accepting were still 2 different things. They fed the children weak broth. Anything heavier might make them sick after days of hunger. Sarah ate carefully, her manners still present despite everything. Thomas just stared into his bowl until Sarah coaxed him to drink. Thank you, Sarah said when she finished, her voice small but steady. We didn't think anyone would find us. You're lucky Victor was checking his trap line, Alara said, sitting beside them. Another hour and... She didn't finish, didn't need to. Sarah looked at Victor with something like awe. You saved us. Victor shifted uncomfortably. Just happened to be there. No, Sarah insisted. You saved us. You didn't have to. You could have walked away. Could have. Should have. Probably. But here they were. That night they gave the children the south side of the cabin, Alara's side. She moved her bedroll to the north corner, creating a careful distance between herself and Victor that somehow felt more intimate than when they'd been separated by the curtain. The children fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted. Victor and Alara sat by the fire, not speaking, both thinking about the impossible situation they'd found themselves in. Tell me about the war, Alara said suddenly. Victor looked at her, surprised. Why? Because I want to understand how you make decisions, how you function when everything's impossible. It was more direct than her usual approach, more personal. But maybe the day's events had stripped away some of their careful politeness. The war was different, Victor said. I had orders, structure, someone telling me what to do. And when you didn't? He was quiet for a long moment. I tried to do what seemed right. Didn't always work out. Sometimes what seemed right got people killed. But you kept trying. What else could I do? Alara nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something she'd suspected. You're going to want to keep them. The children. It wasn't a question. Victor didn't pretend otherwise. Yes. Even though it's impractical, even though it puts all of us at risk. Yes. Why? Victor stared into the fire, watching flames consume wood, transforming it into heat and light and ash. Because they need someone. Because I know what it's like to be alone. Because, he paused, because maybe this is what we're supposed to do. Build something, not just a cabin or a homestead, something that matters. That's not very practical, Victor. I know. Alara was silent for so long Victor thought she might have fallen asleep. Then she spoke, her voice soft but firm. If we do this, and I mean if, we do it properly. We file for guardianship. We make it legal. We don't just take in strays and hope for the best. Victor felt hope flare in his chest, cautious and fragile. You're saying yes? I'm saying I'll think about it, really think about it, and tomorrow we'll discuss it like adults and make a decision together. She looked at him, firelight catching in her gray eyes. That's what partners do, right? Right. They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn down, listening to the children's soft breathing, feeling the weight of the decision ahead. Victor thought about the war again, about all the times he'd had to choose between bad options and worse ones, about how the hardest part was never the choosing. It was living with the choice afterward, but he'd survived those choices. Maybe he could survive this one too. Maybe they both could. Morning brought clarity and complications in equal measure. The children woke slowly, disoriented, then remembered where they were. Sarah's face cycled through relief and grief so quickly it was painful to watch. Thomas just burrowed deeper into his blanket. Alara made breakfast, cornmeal mush with a precious spoonful of honey. Not much, but hot and filling. Sarah ate mechanically. Thomas needed coaxing from his sister before he'd take even a few bites. After the meal, Alara sent the children to tend the fire while she and Victor stepped outside. The snow had stopped, leaving everything covered in white that looked peaceful until you remembered it was also deadly. "We need to talk," Alara said. They walked a short distance from the cabin, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I barely slept," she continued. "Kept running numbers in my head. We have enough food for maybe 3 months if we're careful. For 2 people. Add 2 children and we're looking at 6 weeks. Maybe less. We can hunt more. Trap more. In winter? Victor, be realistic." "I am being realistic. I'm also being honest. I can't take them back to that town. I won't." Alara's jaw tightened. "This isn't just about what you will or won't do. This affects both of us. All of us." "I know that. Do you? Because right now you're making decisions based on feelings, not facts. And you're making them based only on facts. Sometimes feelings matter too." It was as close to an argument as they'd come since marrying. They stood facing each other in the snow, both stubborn, both right in their own way. Finally, Alara exhaled hard. "If we do this, we do it smart. We take inventory today. Figure out exactly what we have and how far it'll stretch. We increase the trap lines. I'll see what I can forage even in winter. There are roots, bark, things people forget about. And we file papers as soon as the weather permits. Make it legal." Victor felt that cautious hope again. "So we're keeping them? We're trying to keep them. There's a difference. If it becomes clear we can't sustain 4 people, we make hard choices. Agreed?" It wasn't the wholehearted yes he'd wanted, but it was honest, and it was more than he'd expected. "Agreed," he said. They told the children after returning inside. Sarah's face transformed, hope and disbelief and desperate gratitude all at once. Thomas didn't show much reaction, but his small hand found Sarah's and held tight. "You mean it?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "You'll let us stay?" "We'll try," Alara said carefully. "But you need to understand, this won't be easy. We have very little. We'll all have to work hard, and there are no guarantees." "I can work," Sarah said quickly. "I'm strong. I can help with everything. And Thomas, he's quiet, but he's good. He won't be trouble." "Nobody said anything about trouble," Victor said. "But Alara's right. It'll be hard. Harder than anything you've known. Harder than watching your parents die?" Sarah asked, then immediately looked stricken. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "It's all right," Alara said softly, kneeling to be eye level with the girl. "You're right. You've already survived hard things, harder than most people ever face. So yes, you're probably strong enough for this, but we all have to be honest with each other about what we have and what we need. Can you do that?" Sarah nodded seriously. "I can. We can. Right, Thomas?" The boy nodded, still silent, but his eyes had lost some of their shell-shocked emptiness. The inventory Alara conducted that afternoon was sobering. They had flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, coffee, and very little else. At current consumption, maybe 2 months. With strict rationing and luck, 3. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Victor spent the rest of the day expanding his trap lines while Alara organized the cabin for 4 people instead of 2. Sarah helped without being asked, intuiting what needed doing before Alara could request it. Thomas sat by the fire, watching everything with those 2 old eyes. That evening, Victor came back with 2 rabbits. Better than nothing, but not the haul they needed. "It'll get harder," he said, skinning them outside. "Animals hole up in winter, go dormant. We might go days between catches." "Then we hunt bigger," Alara said. "Bigger means deer, maybe elk if we're lucky." "Can you track them?" Victor considered. "In snow, yes, but it's dangerous. And even if I get one, we'd need to preserve the meat. We don't have enough salt." "Then we find another way," Smoking, drying, there are methods. She said it with such certainty, like she could will solutions into existence through pure determination. Victor found himself believing her. Over the next weeks, they fell into a new rhythm, harder than before, but sustainable. Barely. Victor hunted and trapped with increased urgency. Some days he came back with game. Some days he came back empty-handed and exhausted. Alara stretched everything, watered down soup, rationed bread, made meals from scraps that shouldn't have been meals at all. Sarah proved invaluable. She could cook, clean, mend, and seemed to anticipate needs before they arose. More than that, she understood hardship in a way that made her resilient instead of broken. Thomas remained mostly silent, but he wasn't entirely mute. He spoke occasionally to Sarah in whispers. Once, Victor caught him whispering to the horses, small signs of healing, fragile but real. December brought the kind of cold that felt personal, vindictive, the kind that found every gap in the walls, every thin spot in their clothing, every moment of weakness. They burned through firewood faster than Victor could replenish it. He spent entire days chopping, hauling, stacking. His hands cracked and bled. His shoulders ached constantly. But stopping meant freezing, so he didn't stop. Alara developed a cough that worried Victor more than he wanted to admit. She dismissed it as nothing, worked through it. But he heard her at night, trying to muffle the sound so the children wouldn't worry. "You need to rest," he said one morning after a particularly bad spell. "I'll rest when we're not in survival mode," she replied, then immediately coughed again, hard enough to make her wince. "Alara, I'm fine, Victor. We have more important things to worry about." She wasn't fine, but she also wasn't wrong about priorities. The food situation was getting desperate. They were down to one meal a day, supplemented by whatever Victor could hunt or Alara could forage. Sarah never complained, just ate less so Thomas could have more. Victor saw her doing it and started doing the same. Then Alara joined in. They were all trying to sacrifice for each other, which meant everyone was slowly starving. Something had to give. Victor made a decision without consulting Alara, the first time since they'd agreed to partnership. He took his rifle and enough supplies for 3 days, and he went hunting for real game. He left before dawn, kissing Alara's forehead while she slept. An intimacy so unexpected it surprised him even as he did it. She stirred but didn't wake. The hunting was brutal. Temperatures well below freezing, snow to his knees in places, and deer were scarce, driven to lower elevations or already hunted by others desperate enough to brave the weather. Victor tracked for a day and a half before finding fresh sign. Then another half day following it, moving carefully, quietly, every skill from the war applied to this new campaign. He found the deer in a small clearing, a young buck pawing through snow for dead grass. Not ideal, older animals had more meat, but Victor wasn't in a position to be choosy. The shot had to be perfect. He had 1 cartridge left. Miss, and he'd wasted 3 days and the last of their ammunition. Victor steadied his breathing, sighted carefully, and squeezed the trigger. The buck dropped. Clean kill. Thank whatever powers governed luck and marksmanship. Getting it back to the cabin was another problem. The deer probably weighed close to 150 pounds. Victor field dressed it, removing organs to lighten the load, but it was still too heavy to carry far. He ended up building a makeshift sled from branches, then dragging the carcass behind him. It took the better part of 2 days to cover the distance that had taken him 1 day on the way out. He arrived back at the cabin after dark, exhausted to his bones, every muscle screaming. But when Alara opened the door and saw the deer, her face transformed. "You did it," she breathed. "We did it," Victor corrected. "This buys us time." They stayed up most of the night processing the meat. Alara had been busy while he was gone, building a smoking rack using techniques she'd somehow learned or invented. Together they butchered, smoked, dried, and salted every ounce of usable meat. "Where did you learn this?" Victor asked, watching her work with surprising expertise. "A book," Alara said. "There was a homesteading manual in the store. I'd read it years ago. Didn't think I'd ever need the information, but you remembered it." "Some of it. The rest is improvisation." They worked side by side, covered in blood, freezing cold, running on fumes. But there was something almost celebratory about it. They'd gotten a win. Small, temporary, but real. "I'm sorry," Victor said as they hung the last strips to smoke. Alara looked at him, surprised. "For what?" "For leaving without telling you. For making that decision alone." She considered this, then shrugged. You brought back a deer. I'll forgive a lot for that. A pause. But don't make it a habit. Wouldn't dare. Her mouth twitched toward a smile. How was it, out there? Cold. Lonely. Made me realize something. What's that? Victor met her eyes. That I'd rather be here freezing with all of you than anywhere else warm and alone. Alara's expression softened. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. That's a low bar. Maybe. But I'll take it. They went to bed that night with full stomachs for the first time in weeks. The children were already asleep, curled together for warmth. Victor and Alara settled into their respective corners, the familiar curtain between them. Victor? Alara said into the darkness. Yeah? Thank you for the deer, for coming back, for all of it. You're welcome. I know I'm not always easy to live with. I'm stubborn and practical to a fault, and I don't show gratitude well. Alara, Victor interrupted gently, you don't have to do this. Do what? Apologize for being who you are. I like who you are. Silence. Then very quietly, I like who you are too. It was a small admission, simple words, but they carried weight, acknowledgement of something growing between them that neither had planned for, but both were beginning to accept. Victor fell asleep with something dangerously close to contentment. The deer meat changed everything. With protein and the calories it provided, they had energy to do more than merely survive. Victor could hunt longer. Alara could work harder. Even the children seemed to bloom, color returning to their faces, their movements less lethargic. Sarah started talking more, sharing fragments of her life before. Her mother had been a seamstress, her father a clerk. They'd been respectable people, educated even, until fever had swept through and destroyed everything. Mama used to say that fortune turns on a coin, Sarah said one afternoon while helping Alara mend clothes. Heads you're prosperous, tails you're ruined, no in between. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman, Alara said. She was, but wisdom didn't save her. There was no bitterness in Sarah's voice, just fact. She'd learned early that fairness was a luxury the world didn't always provide. Thomas remained quiet, but he started following Victor around during chores. Not talking, just observing. Victor found himself explaining things as he worked, how to split wood efficiently, how to read animal tracks, how to judge weather by the sky. The boy absorbed it all silently, occasionally nodding to show he understood. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, Victor said one day, but if you ever do, I'm listening. Thomas looked up at him with those dark, serious eyes. Then very quietly, I know. 2 words. But they felt like a victory. Christmas came and went with little fanfare. They had no decorations, no gifts, no celebration to speak of, but Alara made dried apple tarts with the last of their sugar, and Victor told stories by the fire, heavily edited war stories that focused on camaraderie and absurdity rather than violence. Sarah laughed at the story about the private who'd gotten his foot stuck in a bucket and had to march that way for 3 miles. Thomas almost smiled at the tale of the general's horse that kept stealing vegetables from the mess tent. Tell us about when you met, Sarah said when Victor ran out of stories. Victor and Alara exchanged glances. It's not much of a story, Alara said. Don't care, tell us anyway. So they did, trading off details. The muddy street, the crate, the blunt proposal. Sarah listened with rapt attention. That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard, she declared when they finished. Victor snorted. There was nothing romantic about it. Yes, there was. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped her. You made a choice that changed both your lives. That's romantic. That's practical, Alara corrected. Can it be both? Neither Victor nor Alara had an answer for that. January tested them harder than any month before. A blizzard locked them inside for 5 days straight. They burned furniture to stay warm when the wood ran low. Ate rationed portions that left them all hungry. The walls pressed in, and tempers grew short. Sarah and Thomas bickered over nothing. Alara's cough got worse. Victor felt the weight of responsibility crushing down, wondering if his decision to keep the children had been selfish pride rather than genuine help. On the 5th night, trapped inside with wind howling like the damned outside, Alara's cough turned into something worse. She couldn't catch her breath, couldn't stop the spasms racking her body. Victor held her upright, helping her breathe, while Sarah boiled water for steam. Thomas watched with wide, frightened eyes. "Don't you dare!" Victor whispered fiercely when the worst of the fit passed. "Don't you dare give up now. We need you. I need you." Alara looked at him through watering eyes. "I'm trying," she managed. "Try harder." It wasn't fair, demanding that from her. But fairness had nothing to do with survival. They got through that night and the next. The storm broke on the 7th day. Alara's cough gradually improved, though it left her weak. Victor went out to survey the damage, snowdrifts 6 feet high, 2 of their fences down. The smoke rack partially collapsed. It would take days to dig out, to repair, to get back to anything resembling functional. He stood there in the snow, looking at the wreckage, feeling defeat creeping in. Then Sarah appeared beside him, bundled in every piece of clothing she owned. "Where do we start?" she asked simply. Not if, where. Assuming they would start. Assuming they would fix it. Victor looked down at this girl who'd lost everything and still had the courage to ask where to start. "The fences," he said. "We'll need them when the thaw comes." They worked together in silence, digging out posts, straightening wire. It was hard work made harder by the cold and their weakened state. But it was also forward motion. Progress. Something other than just enduring. By the time they came inside, both were exhausted. But Alara had managed to make soup from bone broth in the last of the venison. Thin soup, but hot. "We're going to make it," she said, more statement than question. "We are," Victor agreed. He almost believed it. February brought a false thaw, temperatures rising just enough to melt the top layer of snow before freezing again, creating a crust of ice over everything. It made walking treacherous and hunting nearly impossible. Victor fell twice, the second time hard enough to crack a rib. He didn't tell anyone, just wrapped it tight and tried not to let the pain show. They couldn't afford for him to be injured, couldn't afford weakness. But Alara noticed. She always noticed. "You're hurt," she said one evening while the children slept. "I'm fine." "Victor, I said I'm fine." Her jaw set in that stubborn way he'd come to recognize. "Let me see." "There's nothing to see." "Then you won't mind showing me." They stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Victor sighed and pulled up his shirt. The bruise had spread across his entire left side, purple and yellow and black. Alara's expression went from concern to furious. "This happened 2 days ago," she said flatly. "And you said nothing." "What was there to say? It doesn't change anything. I still have to hunt, still have to work." "You could have made it worse, could have punctured a lung, could have—" "But I didn't." Alara's hands were shaking. With anger or fear, Victor couldn't tell. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to sacrifice yourself and call it strength." "I was trying to protect us? You were trying to protect us." Her voice rose. "How does hiding an injury protect us? If something happens to you, if you collapse out there or can't work, what then? We all suffer. Your pain becomes our crisis." She was right. Victor knew she was right, but admitting it felt like admitting weakness. "I'm not used to—" He struggled for words. "To mattering. To people depending on me. I don't know how to do this." Alara's expression softened slightly. "Then learn. That's what I'm doing. We're both learning. But you can't learn if you're too proud to admit when you need help." "I need help," Victor said quietly. "What?" "I need help. With the rib. With everything. I can't do this alone." It cost him something to say it, but the relief on Alara's face made it worth the cost. She wrapped his ribs properly, her hands gentle but efficient. "You rest tomorrow. I'll check the traps." "Alara, don't argue. You've been carrying us. Let us carry you for a day." So he did. It went against every instinct, but he stayed in the cabin while Alara checked the trap line. Sarah took over his other chores. Even Thomas helped, feeding the animals with his sister's guidance. Victor felt useless, but he also felt cared for in a way he hadn't experienced since before the war. Maybe before that even. When Alara returned with 2 rabbits and a string of frost in her hair, she looked triumphant. "See? We survived a day without you. Barely, but we managed." Victor couldn't help smiling. Barely is still managing. Exactly. March arrived with uncertainty, warm days followed by freezing nights, sun that promised spring but didn't deliver. The land seemed undecided whether to wake up or stay dormant. Their supplies were critically low again. The deer meat was gone. They were back to one meal a day, sometimes less. But there was a difference now, a resilience born from having survived the worst of winter. "We're going to make it," Sarah said with utter conviction one morning. "How do you know?" Thomas asked, a full sentence, the most he'd said in weeks. Sarah grinned at her brother. "Because we're still here. Because we keep trying. That's all you can do. Keep trying until you succeed, or you can't try anymore. And we can still try." Simple wisdom from a child who'd learned it too young, but wisdom nonetheless. Victor caught Alara's eye across the cabin. Something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Or gratitude. They'd taken in two children against all logic, and somehow, impossibly, it was working. Not smoothly, not easily, but working. That night, after the children were asleep, Victor and Alara sat by the dying fire. They'd stopped maintaining the curtain between their sleeping areas weeks ago. It seemed pointless when they were all huddled together for warmth anyway. "I've been thinking," Alara said quietly. "About?" "About us. About this." She gestured vaguely at the cabin, the children, everything. "When we started this, it was just survival, a practical arrangement." "It was. But it's not anymore, is it?" Victor was quiet for a long moment. "No, it's not." "When did it change?" "I don't know. Gradually, then all at once." He looked at her in the firelight. "Does it matter?" "Maybe. Maybe not. I just wanted to acknowledge it, that this has become something more than we planned." "Something better?" Alara smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "Yes, something better. Something—" Victor reached out, and after a moment's hesitation took her hand. Her fingers were rough from work, scarred from dozens of small injuries. Beautiful, in their own way. "When spring comes," he said, "we'll expand, plant more, build onto the cabin, make this place sustainable." "That's ambitious." "You said we should be ambitious, that we were building something that mattered." "I did say that." "Were you right?" Alara squeezed his hand. "Yes, I think I was." They sat like that until the fire burned to embers, hands linked, not speaking, just being together. It wasn't romance in any traditional sense, but it was partnership. It was trust. It was two people who'd chosen each other deliberately and were still choosing each other despite everything. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe that was romantic after all. The last week of March brought the true thaw. Ice melted, revealing dead grass beneath. Streams started flowing again. Birds returned, their songs foreign after months of silence. And with the thaw came possibility. Victor and Alara stood outside one morning, surveying their land with new eyes. The cabin had survived. They'd survived. Against odds that should have broken them, they'd endured. "Ready to start building?" Alara asked. Victor looked at her, this woman who'd been a stranger 6 months ago and was now the center of everything. This woman who'd taken in 2 orphans with him on little more than faith. This woman who'd fought winter. And won. "Ready," he said. They had no idea if they'd succeed. The land was still harsh, their resources still limited, their future still uncertain. But they had something now they hadn't had before. Something more valuable than money or supplies or easy conditions. They had each other. And that somehow felt like enough. Spring didn't arrive gently. It came in fits and starts, warm mornings giving way to freezing nights, rain turning to sleet without warning. The land seemed as uncertain about waking up as they were about what came next. Victor started the expansion on the first dry day in April. The plan was simple: add another room to the cabin, giving the children their own space. Privacy mattered, especially as Sarah grew older. But simple didn't mean easy. The ground was still half frozen in places, making digging foundations brutal work. Victor's ribs had healed, but they ached in the cold, a constant reminder of his limitations. He pushed through anyway, because that's what you did. You pushed through. Sarah helped where she could, holding boards steady while Victor hammered, fetching tools before he asked. Thomas shadowed them both, still mostly quiet, but present in a way that counted. "Why don't you talk more?" Victor asked the boy one afternoon, more curious than critical. Thomas was silent so long Victor thought he wouldn't answer. Then, words didn't help when Mama died, or Papa. So I stopped using them. It was the longest sentence Victor had heard from him, raw and honest in the way only children could be. That makes sense, Victor said carefully. But you know words can help too, right? Not always, but sometimes. Maybe. Thomas picked up a nail, examined it. Sarah says I should talk to you and Alara. Says you're good people. Your sister's smart. I know. A pause. Are you going to keep us? Really keep us? There it was, the fear underneath everything. Victor set down his hammer and looked at the boy directly. Yes, we're going to keep you, both of you, for as long as you want to stay. What if we're too much trouble? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what families do. Thomas considered this, his young face serious. We're a family? We are if we decide we are. The boy nodded slowly, like Victor had confirmed something he'd hoped but hadn't dared believe. Then he picked up another nail and handed it to Victor, and they went back to work. That evening, Victor told Alara about the conversation. They were outside, checking the garden plot she'd started preparing. The soil was poor, but Alara had a plan involving compost and creek silt and determination. He asked if we were a family, Victor said. Alara's hand stilled in the dirt. What did you tell him? That we are if we decide we are. And have we? Decided? Victor looked at her, really looked. Dirt under her nails, hair escaping its bun, exhaustion written in every line of her body. But also strength, purpose. Something he'd learned to recognize as happiness, even if it came wrapped in struggle. I have, he said. Have you? Alara smiled, tired but genuine. I decided weeks ago, just wasn't sure you had. Why didn't you say anything? Because some things people need to figure out for themselves. She went back to working the soil. Besides, I knew you'd get there eventually. You're slower than me, but you arrive. Victor found himself almost laughing. Slower than you? At emotional realizations, yes. At physical labor, you've got me beat. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. They worked in comfortable silence after that, preparing earth for seeds that might not grow, building something that might not last, but trying anyway because that's what hope looked like when you stripped away all the romance. The first real crisis of spring came in late April. Victor was hunting when he heard the scream, high-pitched, terrified, unmistakably Sarah's. He ran, his heart in his throat, rifle forgotten. He found them by the creek. Sarah was in the water, waist deep, struggling against the current. Thomas was on the bank, sobbing, and Alara was already moving toward the girl, her face set in grim determination. What happened? Victor shouted. She was trying to fill the water bucket, Thomas managed between sobs. The bank gave way. She fell in. The creek was running high with snowmelt, fast and cold enough to kill. Sarah was a strong girl, but strength only bought time against water like this. Alara had already waded in up to her knees when Victor grabbed her arm. I'll go, he said. You can't swim. Neither can you. Well enough. There wasn't time to argue. Alara pulled free and pushed deeper into the current. Victor watched helplessly as the water reached her waist, then her chest. She grabbed for Sarah, but the current pulled them both under. Victor didn't think. He just moved, plunging into water so cold it felt like knives. The current took him immediately, spinning him, dragging him downstream. His boots filled with water, his coat became an anchor, but he kicked toward where he'd seen them go under. His hand found fabrics. He grabbed, pulled, broke the surface, gasping. Alara had Sarah, but she was struggling too, being pulled away from shore. The branch, Thomas was screaming, pointing at a fallen tree that stretched partway across the creek. Victor fought the current, one arm around Alara, using his legs to angle them toward the branch. His lungs burned. His limbs were going numb. But he got them there, shoving Alara and Sarah against the rough bark. Climb, he choked out. Alara didn't argue. She pushed Sarah toward the bank while Victor held them steady against the current. The girl caught the branch, pulled herself along it, reached shore. Alara followed, slower but determined. Victor tried to follow, but his hands wouldn't work right. Too cold, too exhausted. The current pulled at him, patient and relentless. Then Sarah was back on the branch, reaching out. Take my hand. I'll pull you in. Take my hand. He did. Sarah braced herself against the tree and hauled with surprising strength. Alara grabbed his other arm from the bank. Between them, they dragged him out of the water and onto solid ground. They lay there gasping, soaked and shaking. Thomas threw himself onto Sarah, crying. Alara was coughing water, her face pale as death. Victor couldn't feel his feet. "Everyone alive?" he managed. "Alive," Alara confirmed. "Alive," Sarah echoed. Thomas just nodded against his sister's shoulder. They helped each other back to the cabin, moving slowly, supporting each other. Once inside, they stripped off wet clothes with shaking hands and huddled by the fire in blankets. "That was stupid," Alara said, her teeth chattering. "All of it was stupid." "The bank just gave way," Sarah said miserably. "I wasn't being careless, I swear." "I know. I'm not blaming you." Alara pulled the girl close. "I'm blaming the creek and winter and Montana, but not you." "I thought you were going to drown," Thomas whispered. "We didn't, though," Sarah said, trying to sound brave. "Victor saved us." "You saved me," Victor corrected. "Couldn't have made it out without you pulling." "We saved each other then," Sarah decided. "That's usually how it works," Alara said quietly. They sat there as the fire slowly warmed them, all four pressed together, still shaking but alive. It could have gone differently so easily. One wrong move, one moment of weakness, and they would have been planning funerals instead of warming up. But they'd gotten lucky, or skilled, or some combination of both that didn't have a name. "New rule," Victor said. "Nobody goes near the creek alone until the water's down. Agreed?" "Agreed," they said in unison. That night, none of them could sleep. Too much adrenaline still pumping through their veins, too many what-ifs circling their minds. Victor lay awake, listening to the others breathe. Thomas had finally fallen asleep against Sarah. But Alara was awake too, he could tell by her breathing. "Alara?" he said quietly. "Yeah? You scared me today." "You scared me too. I couldn't lose you, any of you, but especially you." There was a long silence. Then, "Victor, are we still pretending this is just a practical arrangement?" "Are you?" "No, I stopped pretending months ago." Victor felt something shift in his chest, something that had been tightly controlled, carefully managed, suddenly breaking free. "Me too," he admitted. "So what is this? What are we?" "I don't know, but it's more than I expected, more than I deserve." "Don't say that." "It's true, though. I'm a broke ex-soldier with nothing to offer except hard work and broken ribs that won't heal right. Victor, and you're brilliant and strong and somehow keeping all of us alive through sheer determination and stubbornness. Victor, stop." He stopped. "You're an idiot if you think you have nothing to offer," Alara said, her voice fierce. "You gave me a reason to fight when I'd given up. You took in 2 children without hesitation. You nearly drowned today, saving Sarah and me. You think that's nothing?" "I just did what anyone would." "No. You did what you do, what you've always done. You see what needs doing and you do it. Consequences be damned. That's not nothing. That's everything." Victor didn't know what to say to that. Words felt inadequate. "I love you," Alara said simply. "I didn't plan to, didn't expect to, but I do. And I think you love me too, even if you're too scared to admit it." She was right. Of course she was right. Victor had known it for weeks, maybe months, had felt it growing like prairie grass, stubborn and persistent despite poor conditions. "I do," he said. "Love you, I mean. I do." "Good, because this would be awkward otherwise." Victor found himself laughing despite everything. "That's your response? Good? What do you want? Poetry?" "Victor, we're lying on the floor of a half-built cabin, still recovering from nearly drowning, with 2 orphans sleeping 10 feet away. Romance can wait, but honesty can't. Fair enough? So we're agreed? We love each other. This is real. Agreed. And tomorrow we keep building, keep fighting, keep trying." "Together," Victor added. "Together," Alara confirmed. The expansion took 6 weeks instead of the 2 Victor had optimistically projected. Everything took longer than planned. Boards warped, tools broke, rain delayed progress. But slowly, stubbornly, the new room took shape. Sarah threw herself into making it livable once the walls were up. She found wildflowers and put them in jars, swept the floor obsessively, arranged their few possessions with care. "It's beautiful," she declared when it was finished. It wasn't beautiful. It was rough lumber and gaps in the floorboards and a window that stuck, but it was theirs. Private space in a world that offered precious little privacy. Thomas seemed to grow 2 inches once they had their own room. Started talking more. Not constantly, but enough that his voice became a regular part of the household rhythm. With the cabin expanded, Victor turned his attention to the land itself. Alara's garden was struggling, not surprising given the poor soil and her limited experience, but she'd gotten some things to sprout. Weak, scraggly things, but alive. "What do you know about farming?" Victor asked one evening. "Almost nothing," Alara admitted. "My mother grew herbs in pots. That's about the extent of my agricultural knowledge." "Mine too. The war taught me how to destroy farms, not run them. So we're improvising again. Seems to be our specialty." They improvised. Trial and error became their method. They planted too early and lost seedlings to frost. Planted too late and lost them to drought. But they learned. Slowly, painfully, they learned. The physical work was relentless. Victor built fences, cleared rocks, dug irrigation ditches. His body was harder than it had been before the war, leaner, all the softness burned away by labor and sparse food. Alara worked beside him, her hands permanently calloused now, her skin bronzed by sun. She'd stopped trying to maintain the appearance of a town lady. Out here, vanity was a luxury nobody could afford. Sarah and Thomas took on responsibilities without being asked. Feeding animals, hauling water, weeding the garden. The work aged them in ways that made Victor sad. But there was no alternative. Childhood was another luxury in short supply. By early summer, they had something resembling a functioning homestead. Not prosperous, not easy, but functional. Then the letter came. Victor had ridden to the nearest settlement, 20 miles south, to trade for supplies they couldn't make themselves. Salt, needles, a small bag of seed wheat they'd need for next year's planting. The settlement was barely more than a trading post and a few scattered buildings, but it had something they didn't: connection to the wider world. Mail came through irregularly, carried by whoever was willing to make the trip. The clerk recognized Victor. "Got something for you? Well, for Alara Voss, but I figure that's you now." The letter was official-looking, heavy paper with an embossed seal. Victor's gut tightened looking at it. He rode back faster than wise, the letter burning a hole in his saddlebag. Official correspondence never meant good news. Not in his experience. Alara saw his face when he arrived and knew immediately something was wrong. "What happened?" "Letter came for you. Looks official." Her expression went carefully neutral. "I see. They sent the children to check the trap line. Busy work to give the adults privacy." Once Sarah and Thomas were out of earshot, Alara opened the letter with shaking hands. She read it once, then again, then a third time, her face going paler with each pass. "Alara? It's from Marcus's family. His brother." Her voice was flat, carefully controlled. "They're contesting my ownership of the store property in Sweetwater, claiming I forged documents, that the property was Marcus's family legacy and should revert to them now that he's dead." Victor felt cold fury building in his chest. "Can they do that?" "I don't know. Maybe. The documents were legitimate, but Marcus's family never approved of our marriage, never approved of me. And they have money, lawyers, influence." She looked up at him, her gray eyes swimming. "If they succeed, they could claim this land too. Everything we've built." "No." Victor's voice was hard. "No, they can't. We filed legal claim. We've been improving the property. That counts for something." "Does it? We're nobodies, Victor. Broke settlers in the middle of nowhere. They're an established family with connections. Who do you think the courts will favor?" She had a point. Justice and law weren't always the same thing. Money and influence could tip scales that should have been balanced. "What do they want?" Victor asked. Alara consulted the letter again. "They want me to return to Ohio to settle the matter in person. Bring all relevant documents. Submit to questioning by their lawyers." "That's insane. It'll take weeks to travel there. We can't leave the homestead unattended that long. Not during growing season." "I know. So you're not going." "If I don't go, they win by default. The claim stands unchallenged." Victor wanted to argue, but he saw the trap. Go and risk losing everything here. Stay and definitely lose everything there. We'll fight it, he said. Hire a lawyer, someone who can represent you without you needing to travel. With what money, Victor? We can barely feed ourselves. Then we'll figure something out. We always do. But Alara was shaking her head. This is different. This isn't weather or hunger or something we can work through. This is the law. And the law isn't on our side. Victor pulled her close, feeling her shake against him. We've survived everything else. We'll survive this too. You can't know that. No, but I believe it anyway. They held each other while the sun set. Two people who'd fought their way through winter and barely come out the other side, now facing a different kind of storm. The next days were tense. They told Sarah and Thomas about the letter, not all the details, but enough. The children deserved to know their future was uncertain again. So we might have to leave? Sarah asked, her voice small. We're going to fight to stay, Alara said firmly. But yes, there's a chance. That's not fair, we just got settled. No, it's not fair. Thomas had gone very quiet again, retreating into that silent space where he processed things too big for words. Sarah held his hand, her young face set with determination that reminded Victor painfully of Alara. Victor spent the following week in a fury of activity, as if he could build their way out of the problem. He cleared more land, fixed every minor issue with the cabin, worked himself to exhaustion every day, then lay awake every night worrying. Alara wrote letters to the territorial government, to the land office, to anyone who might have authority or influence. The responses, when they came, were bureaucratic and unhelpful. File this form. Submit that documentation. Wait for processing. Waiting was torture. We need a different approach, Victor said one evening after another useless letter arrived. Such as? I don't know yet, but legal channels aren't working. Maybe we need to think less legal. Alara frowned. What are you suggesting? I'm not sure, but Marcus's family is trying to intimidate us into giving up. Maybe we need to show them we won't be intimidated. How? Victor didn't have an answer, not yet, but he was thinking about it, turning it over in his mind like a tactical problem from the war. Every problem had a solution. Sometimes you just had to look at it from a different angle. The answer came from an unexpected source. They'd been working in the garden when a rider appeared on the horizon. Victor's hand went automatically to the rifle he now kept close, but the rider's posture was non-threatening. As he got closer, Victor recognized him, the town clerk from Sweetwater who'd married them. Mr. Hale. Mrs. Hale. The clerk dismounted, looking uncomfortable. I hope I'm not intruding. What do you want? Victor asked, not bothering with pleasantries. I heard about the letter, about Marcus's family trying to claim your property. News travels fast. Small territory. People talk. The clerk shifted his weight. I came because I thought you should know. They approached me. Marcus's brother did. Wanted to know if I'd testify that your marriage was fraudulent, that it was a scheme to steal Marcus's property. Victor felt rage building. And what did you tell them? I told them no. The clerk met his eyes. I told them the marriage was legal and properly documented, that I saw no evidence of fraud or coercion, that you two might have had unusual circumstances, but that doesn't make it invalid. Alara stepped forward. Why would you do that? We're nothing to you. The clerk smiled sadly. Because I've been watching you two since you left Sweetwater. Heard reports. How you took in those orphans. How you're making something out of nothing out here. And I realized I'd been wrong about you. About both of you. He paused. I spent too many years judging people without knowing them. Figured it was time to stop. What are they offering you? Victor asked. To testify against us? $500. It was a fortune. More than the clerk probably made in a year. And you're turning it down to help us? I'm turning it down because it's the right thing to do. And because, he hesitated, because I'm tired of being the kind of man who'd take it. Victor and Alara exchanged glances. This changed things. Not everything, but something. Thank you, Alara said quietly. Don't thank me yet. I also came to warn you. Marcus's brother Richard, he's not going to stop. He sees this as a matter of family honor, or maybe just greed. Either way, he's planning to escalate. Might send people out here, try to force the issue. Let him try, Victor said flatly. I'm serious, Mr. Hale. These aren't good people. They'll play dirty. So will we if we have to. The clerk nodded slowly. I figured you'd say that, which is why I brought you this. He pulled out a thick envelope from his coat. Documentation. Every piece of paper related to your marriage, Marcus's death, the property transfers. I made copies of everything in the official records. Can't help you in court directly, but at least you'll have ammunition. Alara took the envelope with shaking hands. This could cost you your position. Probably will. But I've had worse jobs. The clerk climbed back on his horse. One more thing. There's a lawyer in Helena, John Morrison. He takes cases pro bono sometimes when he thinks they're just. Can't promise he'll help, but he's your best shot. How do we pay him? Victor asked. You don't. Not up front, anyway. He works on contingency for cases he believes in, and he hates bullies. The clerk tipped his hat. Good luck. You're going to need it. He rode off, leaving them standing in the dusty yard with an envelope full of hope and a name that might mean salvation or nothing at all. Helena's a week's ride, Victor said. I know. One of us would have to go, the other stay here with the children. I know that too. They looked at each other, both doing the same calculation. Victor was the better rider, the stronger traveler. But Alara knew the documents, understood the legal situation better. You should go, Alara said finally. You sure? No, but it makes the most sense. Victor hated the idea of leaving them, hated it with every fiber of his being, but she was right. I'll leave tomorrow, travel fast, be back in 2 weeks. Bring us salvation, Victor Hale. I'll bring you back something. Whether it's salvation remains to be seen. That night, they lay awake again, this time with Victor's arm around Alara, no pretense of separation remaining. What if this doesn't work? She asked quietly. Then we try something else. And if that doesn't work? Then we keep trying until something does. That's all we can do. Alara was quiet for a long moment. I'm scared. Me too. But you're going anyway. I am. Why? Because you're worth fighting for. The children are worth fighting for. This place we're building is worth fighting for. He tightened his arm around her. And because I'm finally part of something that matters more than just surviving another day. Alara turned to face him in the darkness. When did you get so eloquent? I've always been eloquent. You just weren't listening. She laughed softly, then kissed him. It was the first real kiss they'd shared, not the perfunctory brush of lips at their wedding, but something genuine and deep and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Come back to me, Alara whispered, always. Victor left before dawn, supplies packed, the envelope of documents tucked safely in his coat. Sarah and Thomas came out to see him off, both trying to be brave. You'll take care of things while I'm gone? He asked them. We will, Sarah promised. Thomas just nodded, but he stepped forward and hugged Victor quickly before stepping back, embarrassed. Alara walked with him to where his horse waited. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks, he confirmed. And Victor? Yeah? Don't do anything stupid. Define stupid. You know what I mean. He did. She meant don't sacrifice yourself. Don't throw away your life for pride or principle. Come back alive even if you come back empty-handed. I'll be careful, he promised. Good. He kissed her again, quick and fierce, then mounted his horse. Alara stood watching as he rode away, her hand raised in farewell, her figure getting smaller and smaller until the land swallowed her entirely. Victor rode hard, making good time despite rough terrain. He camped rough at night, eating jerky and hardtack, sleeping with his rifle close. The territory wasn't as wild as it had been 10 years ago, but it wasn't safe either. Helena, when he reached it, was a different world from their homestead. Buildings with actual glass windows, streets with boardwalks, people everywhere, bustling with purpose and commerce. Victor felt out of place immediately. Too rough, too poor, too much like what he was. A broke settler with dirt under his nails and desperation in his pocket. Finding John Morrison's office took half a day of asking directions. When Victor finally located it, he almost turned back. The building was nice. Too nice. Morrison clearly did well for himself, but Victor hadn't ridden a week to give up at the last step. He went inside. The secretary looked at him with barely concealed distaste. Do you have an appointment? No, but I need to see Mr. Morrison. It's urgent. Mr. Morrison is very busy. Perhaps you could... It's about a land fraud case. Family using money and influence to steal from someone who can't fight back. I was told he takes on cases like this. The secretary's expression shifted slightly. Wait here. She disappeared into the back office. Victor stood, hat in hand, feeling every inch the supplicant. When the secretary returned, she looked surprised. Mr. Morrison will see you. 10 minutes. John Morrison was younger than Victor expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a handshake that meant business. Tell me everything, he said without preamble. Fast. I have court in 20 minutes, Victor told him. All of it. The marriage, the homestead, the children, the letter, Marcus's family trying to claim everything. He laid out the facts as cleanly as he could, fighting the urge to plead or grovel. Morrison listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Victor finished, he sat back. This Richard Voss? He's from Ohio? Yes? Wealthy family? Seems to be. And your wife has documentation proving her ownership? Yes. Marriage certificate, property transfer, everything legal. Morrison drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking. Here's the problem. Your wife probably has the law on her side, but Voss has money and time. He can drag this out for years, bleed you dry with legal fees until you give up. Victor's heart sank. So there's nothing you can do. I didn't say that. Morrison leaned forward. I said that's his strategy. Doesn't mean it'll work. I can file counterclaims, challenge jurisdiction, make it expensive for him too. Eventually he'll either give up or we'll force a settlement. How long will that take? Months, maybe a year. Victor felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. We don't have a year. We barely have enough to get through next winter. Then we move fast, aggressive. Make him regret starting this fight. Morrison pulled out paper, started making notes. I'll need those documents, need to file paperwork this week, and I'll need to meet your wife eventually, get her statement directly. About payment, we'll work it out. I take a percentage if we win, nothing if we lose. That acceptable? It was more than acceptable. It was a miracle. Why? Victor asked. Why help us? Morrison looked up, his sharp eyes softening slightly. Because I grew up poor, clawed my way up from nothing, and I remember every person who tried to kick me back down because they thought someone like me didn't deserve better. He smiled grimly. I take a lot of pleasure in defending people like you against people like Richard Voss. Victor left the office 2 hours later with a plan, a lawyer, and something that felt dangerously like hope. Morrison had taken the documents, promising to file everything within days. He'd also written a letter for Victor to bring back to Alara, outlining their strategy. The ride back was faster than the journey out. Victor pushed hard, eager to return, to tell Alara they had a chance. He arrived home 10 days after leaving to find Alara standing in the garden, Thomas beside her, both of them armed with hoes and grim expressions. Victor! Alara dropped the hoe and ran to him. Thank heavens, we had visitors. Victor's blood went cold. What kind of visitors? 3 men. Said they were from Richard Voss, wanted to inspect the property. I told them to leave. And did they? Eventually, but not before making threats. Said we'd be sorry, that we should leave while we still could. Victor felt rage building, hot and familiar. Where's Sarah? In the cabin. She's fine, just shaken. He dismounted, pulling Alara close. I found a lawyer, good one. He's taking the case. Alara sagged against him. Really? Really. We're fighting this, and we're going to win. You can't promise that. No, but I believe it. Alara pulled back, looking up at him with those gray eyes that had first made him stop in a muddy street months ago. I believe it too. They went inside together to tell the children, to read Morrison's letter, to plan their next move. The fight was just beginning. There would be more threats, more pressure, more moments of doubt, but they'd face it together, all 4 of them. And that, Victor was learning, made all the difference. The men came back 3 days later. Victor saw them from a distance, riding in formation like they owned the place. 3 riders, same as before, except this time they brought a 4th, someone in a suit too fine for Montana dust. Sarah Thomas, inside, Victor said quietly. Alara, get the rifle. Victor, just get it. Don't point it at anyone unless I say, but have it ready. The children disappeared into the cabin. Alara emerged moments later with the Winchester, holding it low but visible. She stood beside Victor as the riders approached. The man in the suit dismounted first. He was soft-looking, with hands that had never seen real work and eyes that calculated everything. "Mr. Hale, I presume? And Mrs. Hale?" His voice was smooth, practiced. "My name is Edmund Cross. I represent the Voss family interests." "We know who you represent," Victor said. "What do you want?" "Just to talk. Perhaps we could do this civilly? Inside, perhaps?" "We'll talk right here." Cross smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Very well. I've come with a proposition. The Voss family understands this situation has become complicated. They're prepared to offer a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" Alara asked. $200 for you to vacate this property and surrender all claims to the Sweetwater store. You'll sign documents stating the marriage was fraudulent, undertaken solely for financial gain. In exchange, the family will drop all legal proceedings, and you'll be free to settle elsewhere. Victor felt Alara stiffen beside him. $200 was more than they'd see in a year, maybe 2 years. It would set them up somewhere else, somewhere easier. It was also an insult. "No," Victor said. Cross's smile thinned. "Perhaps you didn't hear the amount. $200 is quite generous, given your circumstances." "We heard you fine. Answer's still no." "Mr. Hale, be reasonable. You have no resources to fight this. The legal battle alone will bankrupt you. My clients have unlimited funds and patience. This offer is your best option." "Best for who?" Alara asked, her voice cold. "Certainly not for us. We'd be admitting to fraud we didn't commit, giving up land we legally claimed, and starting over with nothing but money that'll run out in months. Better than losing everything in court." "Maybe we won't lose." Cross actually laughed. "Mrs. Hale, I've seen the documentation. Your claim is shaky at best. Marcus Voss's family has legitimate grievances about the circumstances of your marriage and subsequent property transfers. A judge will see through this transparent attempt at—" "Stop talking," Victor interrupted. His voice was quiet but carried enough edge to make Cross pause. "You've delivered your message. We've given our answer. Time for you to leave." "I'm afraid I can't do that until you understand the full picture." Cross nodded to one of the men behind him, who pulled out papers. "These are notices of intent. If you don't accept our settlement, we'll be filing claims not just on the Sweetwater property, but on this land as well. We'll argue that since the marriage was fraudulent, all property acquired during the marriage is subject to seizure." "That's not how the law works," Alara said. "It is if you have the right lawyers and the right judge, which we do." Victor took a step forward. The 3 riders behind Cross immediately tensed, hands moving toward weapons. But Victor just stood there, looking at Cross with the same expression he'd worn at Antietam when the artillery started and there was nowhere to run except forward. "You come onto my land," Victor said, each word measured and deliberate. "Threaten my family, try to steal what we built with our own hands, and you expect us to just roll over and take it? I expect you to be smart enough to recognize when you're beaten." "We're not beaten. We're just getting started." Cross's veneer of civility cracked slightly. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Hale. The Voss family doesn't tolerate defiance well." "Then they're going to hate the next few months." The lawyer's face hardened. "Last chance. Take the money. Walk away, or we bury you." "Bury us then," Alara said. "We've survived worse." Cross stared at them for a long moment, then shook his head. "Your funeral." He remounted his horse, his companions following suit. "You'll be hearing from us. And next time, it won't be a conversation." They rode off, leaving dust and threats hanging in the air. Victor waited until they were out of sight before letting out the breath he'd been holding. Alara lowered the rifle, her hands shaking slightly. "Did we just make everything worse?" she asked. "Probably. Was it worth it?" Victor looked at their cabin, their land, the garden starting to show green. "Yeah, it was worth it." Sarah and Thomas emerged from inside, both pale but trying to look brave. "Are they coming back?" Sarah asked. "Eventually," Victor said, "but not today." "What do we do?" Good question. Victor had stood up to Cross on principle, but principle didn't win legal battles. They needed more than defiance. They needed a strategy. That evening, Victor read Morrison's letter again, looking for something they might have missed. The lawyer had been clear about the challenges ahead. Richard Voss had money, connections, and apparently no qualms about playing dirty. But Morrison had also outlined weaknesses in their opponent's case. The marriage is legitimate, Victor read aloud, properly documented and witnessed. They can question motives all day, but that doesn't make it fraudulent. And territorial law is clear. Property claimed and improved is the claimant's, regardless of circumstance. But Cross said they'd challenge our claim to this land too, Alara said. He said they'd try. Doesn't mean they'll succeed. Victor set down the letter. Morrison thinks they're bluffing, trying to scare us into settling. It's working. You scared? Alara considered the question seriously. Terrified, but also angry. They're trying to take everything we've fought for, everything we've built. I won't let them do that without a fight. Even if the fight costs us everything anyway? Even then. Because at least we'll have fought. Victor reached across the table and took her hand. Morrison needs more documentation, proof we've been improving the land, witnesses who can testify to our marriage being legitimate, anything that strengthens our position. The town clerk already offered to testify. We need more than him. Need people who've seen us work this land, who can confirm we're not frauds or opportunists. Alara frowned. We don't exactly have a lot of neighbors out here. No, but we do have the trading post, the settlement south of here, people who've dealt with us, traded with us. That counts for something. Over the next week, they made trips to gather support. It was humbling work, asking for help, explaining their situation, hoping people they barely knew would take their side. The responses were mixed. Some people were sympathetic but unwilling to get involved in legal matters. Others were more direct about their skepticism. You married her awful quick, one trader said bluntly. Can't blame people for wondering about your motives. My motive was survival, Alara said. Same as anyone else out here. Since when is that a crime? It ain't, but it also ain't love. And a marriage without love, well, that makes people question things. The law doesn't require love, Victor pointed out. Just consent and documentation. We had both. The trader shrugged. Maybe so, but I ain't getting involved. Got my own problems. They had better luck with others. The blacksmith who'd repaired Victor's horse remembered them. Saw you two working together, he said. Not a lot of couples actually work together like that. Most just tolerate each other. You two seemed like partners. We are partners, Alara said. Then I'll say so if anyone asks. A woman who ran a boarding house in the settlement also agreed to help. I watched you with those children last time you were here, she told Alara. The way the girl looked at you, the trust in her eyes. You don't fake that. You're a family, plain as day. These small victories accumulated, not enough to guarantee success, but enough to build hope. Meanwhile, the homestead demanded constant attention. The garden was finally producing, small yields but real food. Lettuce, radishes, early peas. Alara tended it obsessively, as if she could will abundance into being through sheer determination. Victor expanded their livestock, trading labor for a few chickens and another cow. Animals meant eggs, milk, eventually meat. They were building sustainability, slow but real. Sarah took to the chickens immediately, naming each one despite Victor's protests. Don't name things we might have to eat, he said. Then we won't eat them, Sarah replied with perfect child logic. Thomas had started helping Victor with the heavier work, splitting wood, hauling water, repairing fence lines. The boy was slight but surprisingly strong, and he worked with a focus that reminded Victor of himself. One afternoon, working side by side, Thomas spoke without prompting. Are we going to lose this place? Victor considered lying, offering false assurance. But Thomas deserved better than that. I don't know, he said honestly. We're fighting not to, but I can't promise we'll win. What happens if we lose? We start over somewhere else. Together? Together. That's not changing, no matter what happens with the land. Thomas nodded, accepting this. Good, because Sarah worries. She doesn't say it, but I can tell. You worry too? Yeah, but less than before. He hammered a fence post into place. Before you and Alara, everything felt temporary, like we were just waiting for the next bad thing. Now it feels different. How? Like we're building towards something instead of just surviving. Even if we might lose it, at least we tried. That matters. Victor felt something crack in his chest. This kid who'd lost everything, who'd been silent for months, had somehow figured out what Victor was still learning, that trying mattered as much as succeeding. "Yeah," Victor said quietly. "It does matter." They worked in comfortable silence after that, building fences that might not stand forever, but would stand for now. July brought Morrison to them. He arrived unannounced on a Tuesday, riding a horse that looked as tired as its rider. "Needed to see the property myself," he explained over coffee that tasted like dirt but was hot. "Also needed to meet all of you. Can't represent people I don't know." He interviewed each of them separately, asked about the marriage, the homestead, the children, their plans. His questions were sharp but not unkind, designed to find weaknesses before their opponents did. When he finished, he sat back and looked at them with something like approval. "Richard Voss is an idiot," he declared.
"How so?" Alara asked. "Because he's fighting the wrong battle. He's trying to prove your marriage was fraudulent, when what he should be doing is accepting it and moving on. Instead, he's wasting time and money on a fight he can't win just because his pride's hurt." "So we're going to win?" Sarah asked hopefully.
"I didn't say that. I said he can't win the fraud argument, but he's got other angles. The property claims, the question of whether Marcus's family should have been consulted on certain decisions. He'll try everything until something sticks." "So what do we do?" Victor asked. "We make it too expensive for him to continue. I've already filed counterclaims, challenging his standing to contest the property, arguing that his delay in filing undermines his case, questioning whether he even has legitimate grievances or just wants money. Every claim costs him legal fees. Eventually, the math won't work in his favor." "Eventually could be a long time," Alara said. "Could be. But I've also sent messages to some friends in the Ohio legal community, making quiet inquiries about Richard Voss's finances. If he's leveraged or cash poor, we might be able to pressure him into dropping this faster." Morrison stayed 2 days, documenting everything, taking photographs of the improvements they'd made, interviewing the few neighbors willing to make statements. When he left, he seemed satisfied but cautious. "You've done good work here," he told them. "That counts for something, but don't get complacent. This is far from over." After he left, Alara found Victor standing in the garden, staring at nothing. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That we're building something real, but it's built on sand. One wrong decision by a judge who's never met us and it all collapses." "So we make sure the judge sees what Morrison saw. A family working hard, building a life. Not frauds or opportunists. And if that's not enough?" Alara stepped beside him, looking out at the land they'd fought so hard for. "Then we tried. We fought. We didn't just roll over and accept what people tried to force on us. That has to count for something." "Does it?" "I think so. I hope so." Victor put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood together watching the sun set over their uncertain future. August brought the harvest. Not much. Their first year, their inexperience showing in every meager yield. But something. Potatoes, beans, enough wheat to maybe make it through winter if they were careful. They worked from dawn until dark, racing against the weather. Sarah proved invaluable, her small hands perfect for detail work. Thomas had lost his fear of dirt and insects, digging potatoes with grim determination. One evening, exhausted and covered in soil, they sat around the table looking at their haul. "It's not enough," Alara said quietly. "It's more than last year," Victor pointed out. "Last year we had the deer. We got lucky. So we'll get lucky again." "You can't count on luck. Can't count on much else out here." It was the closest they'd come to real argument in weeks. The stress of the legal battle, the physical exhaustion, the constant uncertainty, it was wearing on both of them. Sarah and Thomas had quietly disappeared, giving the adult space. "I'm scared," Alara said finally, "of losing this, of failing the children, of everything we've built crumbling because some rich family in Ohio decided they wanted what little we have." "I know." "Do you? Because you always seem so certain, so steady." Victor almost laughed. "I'm terrified every day, but I can't show it because everyone's looking to me to be strong, to have answers, to fix things. You don't have to fix everything alone." "Don't I? You're running yourself into the ground trying to make this land produce. The kids are working harder than children should. I'm supposed to be the one who holds it together. That's not fair to yourself, or to us." Alara stood, crossed to him, and took his face in her work-roughened hands. "We're partners, remember? That means sharing the burden,
All of it. The fear, the uncertainty, the exhaustion. You don't carry it alone. Victor closed his eyes, feeling the weight he'd been holding start to redistribute. I don't know how to not carry it alone. Then learn, like we've learned everything else. Badly at first, better over time. He pulled her close, and they held each other in the quiet kitchen while outside the wind picked up, promising storms. The storms came 3 days later. Not just weather, news.
A letter from Morrison arrived, hand-delivered by a rider willing to go 20 miles out of his way for extra pay. Victor's hands shook opening it. The news was mixed. Morrison had found evidence that Richard Voss was indeed financially overextended. He'd taken loans to expand his business interests and wasn't doing as well as he pretended. This was good. It meant he couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle. But he'd also apparently found a judge sympathetic to his cause. Someone who believed family legacy mattered more than legal technicalities. The case was scheduled for September, less than a month away. "We have to go to Helena," Alara said after reading the letter twice. "Both of us?" "Morrison says it would help if the judge could see us together. See that we're a legitimate couple, not frauds." "What about the harvest? The homestead?" "Sarah and Thomas can manage for a week. They've learned enough." Victor looked at her. "You're trusting children to run a homestead alone?" "I'm trusting capable young people who've survived worse to handle a week of basic maintenance." "Yes." It was risky. But everything was risky now. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing, teaching Sarah and Thomas everything they might need, stocking enough food, making sure the animals were secure. Sarah took it seriously, making lists, asking questions. Thomas just nodded and absorbed everything like he'd been doing this his whole life. "We'll be fine," Sarah assured them. "You just go win our home back." The confidence in her voice nearly broke Victor's heart. They left on a Monday, riding hard to make Helena in 4 days instead of the usual week. Every mile away from the homestead felt wrong, like abandoning a post during battle. But there was no choice. Helena, when they arrived, was preparing for the territorial fair. People everywhere, noise and commerce and celebration. Victor and Alara moved through it like ghosts, focused only on reaching Morrison's office. The lawyer was ready for them. He'd prepared arguments, gathered documentation, and even found a few character witnesses, people who dealt with Victor and Alara and could vouch for their legitimacy. "The judge is named Harlan Curtis," Morrison explained. "He's old territory, been here since before statehood discussions. Conservative, values family and tradition. Richard Voss's lawyers have been working that angle hard." "So we're at a disadvantage," Victor said. "Not necessarily. Curtis also values hard work and self-sufficiency, hates bullies and people who use money to get what they want. We just need to make sure he sees you as the hard-working settlers, not the opportunists." "That shouldn't be hard," Alara said, "since it's true." Morrison smiled. "Truth helps, but presentation matters too. Which is why we need to go over your testimony. Make sure you're both clear and consistent." They spent 2 days preparing. Morrison drilled them on likely questions, taught them how to respond without seeming defensive, warned them about tricks the opposing lawyers might try. "They'll try to make it seem like the marriage was a business transaction," he said. "Don't deny that it started practically, but emphasize how it's grown, how you've become partners, built a life together, taken in children. That's powerful." The night before the hearing, Victor and Alara lay awake in the boarding house room Morrison had secured for them. It was strange being in a real bed again, walls that didn't leak, sounds of the city outside instead of wind and wilderness. "I miss home," Alara said quietly. "Me too." "Think the kids are all right?" "They're fine. Probably doing better than we are." Alara turned to face him in the darkness. "What if we lose tomorrow?" "Then we appeal. Fight it another way." Morrison said, "No, I mean really lose. What if the judge rules against us and that's it? What do we do?" Victor had been avoiding this question, but now it demanded an answer. "We start over," he said slowly. "Find new land, build again, but together. All 4 of us. Even if it means leaving everything we've built? The land matters, but what we've built isn't just the cabin or the fences or the garden. It's us, the family we've become. That goes with us wherever we go." Alara was quiet for a long moment. "When did you become wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just tired of being afraid."
That might be the same thing. They held each other until sleep came, restless and full of dreams about courtrooms and judges and homes that dissolved like smoke.
The hearing began at 9 in the morning in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and older prejudice. Judge Curtis was indeed old territory, weathered face, hard eyes, the bearing of someone who'd seen it all and been impressed by none of it. Richard Voss sat with his lawyers, 3 of them in expensive suits. He was younger than Victor expected, maybe 35, with the soft look of someone who'd never missed a meal or made a hard decision. When he looked at Alara, his expression was pure contempt. Morrison presented their case first. He laid out the timeline clearly, the marriage properly documented and witnessed. The property transfers, all legal. The homestead claim, filed correctly and improved significantly. 2 witnesses testified to Victor and Alara's character. The town clerk confirmed the marriage's legitimacy. Then Voss's lawyers took over. They didn't claim fraud directly. Too hard to prove. Instead, they argued that Alara had taken advantage of Marcus Voss during his illness, manipulating him into transferring property that rightfully belonged to his family. They painted her as a schemer, Victor as her accomplice, their marriage as a transparent attempt to legitimize theft. It was skillfully done, twisting facts just enough to create doubt without crossing into obvious lies. When Alara took the stand, the lead lawyer smiled at her like a snake sizing up prey. "Mrs. Hale, you married Marcus Voss in 1871, correct?" "Yes." "And he died in 1873? "Yes." 2 years, short marriage. Long enough to know him, long enough to mourn him. Did you love him?" Alara hesitated. Victor saw the trap. Say yes, and she'd be asked why she remarried so quickly. Say no, and she'd seem heartless.
"I cared for him," she said carefully. "He was a good man who deserved better than what life gave him." "But you didn't love him." "I respected him. That's a different kind of love." "How convenient. And Mr. Hale here, do you love him?" "Yes." "Even though you married him mere months after Marcus's death?" "I married him because I needed help. I love him because of who he is." The lawyer smiled. "So it was a practical arrangement that happened to develop into love. How fortunate." "Yes," Alara said steadily. "It was fortunate, and fortunate doesn't mean false." When Victor took the stand, they went after his motives. Why marry a widow with debts? Why take on her problems? What did he stand to gain? "I stood to gain a partner," Victor said. "Someone to build a life with. That seemed worth it." Worth taking on significant debt and legal complications? Worth it to not be alone. "Mr. Hale, you fought in the war, correct?" "I did." "Saw combat?" "Yes." "Killed men?" Morrison stood. "Objection. Relevance?" "I'm establishing character," the lawyer said smoothly. Judge Curtis nodded. "I'll allow it, but make your point." "Mr. Hale, in your experience with violence and survival, did you learn that sometimes you have to take what you need to survive?" Victor saw where this was going. "I learned that survival requires hard work and sometimes hard choices, but I never took what wasn't mine."
"Never? Not even supplies from abandoned farms? Food from enemy territory? That was war. Different rules. Is survival out here so different from war? Different rules, different methods, same goal, stay alive at any cost?" "No," Victor said firmly. "War is about destruction. What we're doing is about building, creating something that lasts. There's no comparison." The lawyer smiled like he'd scored a point anyway. The hearing lasted 6 hours. By the end, everyone was exhausted. Judge Curtis thanked them all formally and said he'd deliver his ruling within the week. They waited in Helena, unable to return home, not knowing. Morrison tried to be encouraging, but even he seemed uncertain. "Curtis played it close," he admitted over dinner on the 3rd day. "Can't read which way he's leaning." "Best guess?" Victor asked. Morrison sighed. "Honestly, 50-50. He seemed bothered by Voss's tactics, but he also clearly values family legacy. Could go either way." The ruling came on the 5th day. They gathered in Morrison's office to hear it read. Judge Curtis had ruled in their favor, barely. He acknowledged that, while the circumstances of the marriage were unusual, there was no legal basis to claim fraud. The property transfers were legitimate. The homestead claim was valid. Richard Voss's case was dismissed with prejudice, meaning he couldn't refile the same claims. But Curtis had also included a strongly worded paragraph about the importance of respecting family legacies and not using legal technicalities to circumvent moral obligations. It was a victory that felt like a warning. Morrison was jubilant. We won. That's what matters. Alara looked less certain. Voss won't let this go. Not really. He doesn't have a choice. It's over. But Victor agreed with Alara. Men like Richard Voss didn't accept defeat gracefully. They'd won the legal battle, but the war might not be finished. They rode home the next day, carrying the court documents like precious cargo. The journey felt longer than before, anticipation and anxiety mixing into something almost unbearable. When the homestead finally came into view, Victor felt his chest tighten. Everything looked intact. The cabin stood. The garden showed green. Smoke rose from the chimney. They were still 100 yards out when Sarah burst from the cabin, running toward them, Thomas right behind her. "You won?" Sarah shouted. "Tell me you won." "We won," Alara confirmed, dismounting. Sarah threw herself at Alara, nearly knocking her over. Thomas grabbed Victor's hand and held it tight.
"I knew it," Sarah said, crying and laughing at the same time. "I knew you'd win. I knew it." They went inside together, all four of them, to the home they'd fought so hard to keep. It wasn't perfect. The roof still leaked in places. The floor was still uneven. They were still poor, still struggling, still facing an uncertain future. But it was theirs. Legally, undeniably theirs. And for now, that was enough.
The victory lasted exactly 3 weeks before reality reasserted itself. They'd celebrated quietly that first night back. Nothing extravagant, just a meal that used ingredients they'd been saving, and the luxury of not worrying, at least temporarily, about losing everything. Sarah had even convinced Thomas to smile, really smile, for the first time since they'd met him. But the legal fight had drained resources they didn't have to spare. The small amount they'd saved was gone, spent on Morrison's expenses and the trip to Helena. The harvest, meager to begin with, now had to stretch even further. And autumn was coming fast, bringing with it the promise of another brutal winter. Victor stood outside the cabin one morning in late September, watching frost glitter on the grass. Too early for frost. Bad sign. "We're not ready," Alara said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee that was more hot water than actual coffee. "We're never ready, but we manage anyway. This feels different. We barely made it through last winter with 4 of us. Now we're starting with less." She was right. The pantry told the story clearly. Not enough flour, not enough beans, not enough anything. They'd need another miracle, and miracles had a way of running out. "I could go back to trapping," Victor said. "Expand the lines, go further out." "You did that last year, nearly killed yourself doing it." "Got us through, though." "Barely." Alara sipped her coffee, grimaced at the taste. "We need a different approach. Something sustainable, not just desperate measures every time winter shows up." "I'm open to suggestions." Alara was quiet for a long moment, thinking. When she spoke, her voice was careful, like she was testing the idea even as she voiced it. "What if we weren't alone out here?" Victor frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if there were other families, neighbors close enough to trade with, help each other, share resources during hard times?" "You want to start a settlement?" "Not a settlement exactly, but maybe encourage a few other families to claim land nearby. Pool our knowledge, our labor. There's strength in numbers." It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but Victor found himself considering it seriously. Who would come out here? This land barely supports us. People like us. People who don't have better options, who'd rather struggle together than fail alone. That's not much of a sales pitch. "No, but it's honest." Alara turned to face him. "Look, I don't know if it would work, but I know we can't keep operating on the edge of survival every single year. Something has to change." She was right. Victor knew she was right, but the idea of bringing others into their hard-won space felt risky. They'd barely learned to function as a family of 4. Adding more people, more variables, more potential for conflict and failure, it went against every survival instinct he'd developed. But those instincts had also kept him isolated and alone for years after the war. Until Alara. "Let me think about it," he said finally. "That's all I'm asking." The idea stayed with Victor over the following days as he worked. He mentioned it to Sarah one afternoon while they were repairing the chicken coop. "More people?" Sarah's face lit up. Like other kids? Maybe. Depends on who came. Who?
I think it's a good idea. Thomas and I, we're the only young ones for miles. Gets lonely sometimes. Victor hadn't considered that. He'd been so focused on survival that he'd missed how isolated the children were. Sarah had Thomas, and both had Victor and Alara, but no peers, no friends their own age. What about Thomas? What does he think? Sarah shrugged. He doesn't say much, you know that, but I think he'd like it. He's been talking more lately. Having other people around might help.
That evening, Victor brought it up with Thomas directly while they were feeding the animals. Your sister says you might like having neighbors. Thomas considered this while pouring feed for the chickens. Would they be nice people? We try to make sure of that. Then, yeah, I'd like it. He paused. It's hard being the only ones. Sometimes I forget there's a whole world out there. Other people living normal lives. This isn't normal? Thomas smiled slightly. This is better than normal, but it's still lonely. Out of the mouths of children. Victor was beginning to see the idea differently, not just as a survival strategy, but as something that might improve their quality of life, make them part of something larger than their small, struggling family. He found Alara in the garden, salvaging what she could before the next frost hit. I've been thinking about your idea, he said. And? I think we should try it, but carefully. We find 1 or 2 families willing to settle nearby. See how it works before we encourage more. Alara straightened, hope bright in her eyes. Really? Really? But we do it smart, screen people, make sure they understand what they're getting into. When do we start? Soon as we figure out how to survive this winter ourselves. Alara smiled. Fair enough. October brought the first real test. A cold snap hit hard and early, catching everyone unprepared. The garden died overnight. 3 of their chickens froze despite the shelter Victor had built. The water in the creek started forming ice along the edges. They bundled up, rationed harder, and worked frantically to weatherproof everything before the worst arrived. Victor rebuilt the chicken coop with better insulation. Alara preserved every scrap of food they had. Sarah and Thomas helped without complaint, their young faces serious with understanding. One night, huddled by the fire, Sarah asked the question they'd all been thinking. Are we going to make it? Victor looked at Alara. She looked back. The honest answer was uncertain, but uncertainty wasn't the same as hopeless. We're going to try, Alara said. That's all anyone can do. And if trying's not enough, then we tried anyway. That matters. Sarah nodded, accepting this with the resilience she'd developed too young. I'm glad we're trying together at least. Me too, Thomas added quietly. Victor felt something shift in his chest. They might fail, might lose everything despite their best efforts. But they wouldn't fail alone. And somehow that made the trying worthwhile. The stroke of luck came from an unexpected source. A rider appeared one morning in early November. Not threatening this time, just a weathered man on a tired horse, carrying a letter. From John Morrison, the rider said, handing it over. He paid extra for delivery this far out. Must be important. It was important. Morrison had news. Richard Voss had died. Heart failure, sudden and unexpected. And in dying, he'd created a situation his family apparently didn't want to continue. His widow and children had no interest in pursuing his vendetta against Alara. The lawyers had been paid off and dismissed. The entire matter was closed. More than that, Morrison had negotiated a small settlement, $200, the exact amount Cross had offered months ago, but without the requirement to admit fraud or give up anything. It was paid, Morrison wrote, as compensation for the Hale family's legal expenses and hardship. Victor read the letter 3 times before believing it. He's dead, he said. Alara took the letter, read it herself. All of it's over, really over. They told the children, who reacted with confused relief. This threat that had loomed over them for months had simply evaporated. No final battle. No dramatic confrontation, just death doing what death does, ending things without regard for anyone's plans. Is it wrong that I'm relieved he's dead? Sarah asked. No, Alara said. It's honest. He was trying to destroy us. Relief is natural. But he was still a person. Someone's father, maybe. Both things can be true. He could be someone's father and still be our enemy. Death doesn't erase that. It just ends it. The $200 arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by Morrison himself. The lawyer had ridden out to bring it personally, to make sure they understood the terms and to close the case officially. "You're free and clear," he told them, sitting at their rough table drinking actual coffee they'd splurged on with the advanced knowledge of money coming. "No more claims, no more threats. The property is yours legally and completely." "What do we owe you?" Victor asked. Morrison smiled. "Consider it paid. The Voss estate covered my fees as part of the settlement. You get to keep the full amount, $200. It was more money than they'd seen in years. Not a fortune, but enough to change things. Enough to buy supplies, livestock, seed for spring. Enough to breathe. After Morrison left, they sat around the table staring at the money like it might disappear. "We could leave," Alara said quietly. "Use this to go somewhere easier, somewhere the land doesn't fight us every day." "Do you want to leave?" Victor asked. Alara looked around the cabin. Rough walls they'd built themselves, a roof they'd repaired dozens of times, a floor that still wasn't level. Then she looked at Sarah and Thomas, at Victor, at the life they'd somehow constructed from nothing. "No," she said firmly. "I want to stay. I want to build on what we've started, even though it'll still be hard. Especially because it'll be hard. Because we've proven we can handle hard. And because this is ours in a way nowhere else would be." Victor felt the same. They could leave, start fresh somewhere with better soil and easier winters, but they'd be starting over as strangers again. Here, they had roots. Shallow roots maybe, but real ones. "Then we stay," he said, "and we use this money to make staying sustainable." They spent 2 days planning how to use the windfall. The discussions were intense. Every dollar counted, every decision mattered. But they were good discussions, partnership in action. They decided to spend half on immediate needs, food stores, tools, livestock. The other half they'd save for emergencies and for spring expansion. If they were going to encourage others to settle nearby, they needed to demonstrate it was possible to not just survive, but actually build something. Victor made a trip to the settlement to purchase supplies. He came back with flour, salt, coffee, a pregnant sow, more chickens, and a young bull calf that would eventually service their cow. Real investments in the future. Alara used some of the money to buy seeds, not just survival crops, but things that might actually sell if they produced surplus. Vegetables that could be preserved, herbs that had value in trade. They also hired a carpenter from the settlement to help Victor add a proper second floor to the cabin. The expansion took 3 weeks, but transformed their living space. Sarah and Thomas got a real bedroom upstairs. Victor and Alara finally had privacy on the ground floor. "It's almost civilized," Alara said, standing in their new bedroom, barely more than a closet with a bed, but theirs alone. "Almost," Victor agreed. That night, in their private space for the first time, they made love like married people who actually chose each other, not just two people who'd agreed to survive together. The difference mattered. Afterward, lying in the dark, Alara spoke softly. "I never thought I'd be happy again. After Marcus died, after the town turned on me, I thought happiness was over. Just survival from then on. And now? Now I'm happy. Not every minute, we're still struggling, still fighting for everything. But underneath all that, I'm happy. With you. With this life we're building." Victor pulled her closer. "Me too. I spent years after the war thinking I was broken, that the best I could hope for was making it to the next day. But you changed that. We changed each other. Yeah, we did. December came, and with it the winter they'd been dreading. But this time they were prepared. The cabin was insulated, the food stores were full, the animals were sheltered properly. When the first blizzard hit, they weathered it without panic. Sarah and Thomas had transformed over the months. Sarah was becoming a young woman, capable and confident. She'd started teaching herself to read better using an old primer they'd found, and she practiced her letters every evening by firelight. Thomas talked now, not constantly, but regularly. He still had quiet days, but they were thoughtful quiet rather than traumatized silence. He'd started helping Victor with planning, offering ideas about how to improve things. "We should dig a root cellar," he suggested one day. "A real one, deep enough that things won't freeze. Then we could store more for winter." It was a good idea. They added it to the list of projects for spring. Christmas that year was simple, but real. They had no decorations, no gifts beyond things they'd made themselves. But they had enough food to make a proper meal. Sarah had sewn handkerchiefs for everyone. Thomas had carved simple wooden animals. Victor had built Sarah a small bookshelf. Alara had made Thomas a warm hat. They sat around the table, this makeshift family, and shared a meal that wasn't just about survival. For once, they weren't counting portions or worrying about tomorrow. They were just together. "I want to say something," Sarah announced, standing up with the seriousness of a much older person. "When Thomas and I lost our parents, we thought that was the end of everything good. We were wrong. You two gave us a new start, a new family, and I'm grateful for that every single day." She sat down quickly, embarrassed by her own emotion. Thomas nodded in agreement, not trusting himself to speak. Alara's eyes were wet. "You two gave us something too, a reason to build instead of just survive. You made us into a real family." Victor raised his cup of watered-down cider. "To family, the one we chose and the one that chose us." They drank to that, and to the future they were building together. January brought the letter they'd been waiting for. Word had spread about their homestead, about the family that had fought the law and won, about the land they were making productive against all odds. A family from Iowa, husband, wife, 3 young children, had written asking about settling nearby. "They want to know if we'd help them get started," Alara read from the letter. "Advice? Maybe some shared labor. They have some money saved, but not much experience." "Sounds familiar," Victor said. "Do we help them?" It was the question they'd been building toward for months. They could say no, keep their resources to themselves, maintain their isolation, or they could take a risk on something bigger. "We help them," Victor decided, "but we're honest about how hard it is. No false promises." They wrote back, laying out the reality clearly. The soil was poor. The winters were brutal. Success required constant work and frequent luck. But if they were willing to try, Victor and Alara would help however they could. The Iowa family arrived in March, just as the snow was finally melting. Their name was Jensen, Carl and Martha, with children aged 7, 5, and 3. They looked terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Victor and Alara helped them file a claim on land 2 miles south, close enough for cooperation, far enough for independence. Then they helped them build a basic cabin using lessons learned from their own mistakes. The work was hard, made harder by teaching while doing, but it felt right. Carl was willing to learn. Martha had farming experience they desperately needed. The children gave Sarah and Thomas playmates for the first time in over a year. By the time the cabin was up, both families were exhausted but connected. They'd formed the beginning of what Alara had envisioned, a community of people choosing to help each other rather than struggle alone. "There'll be more," Martha predicted one evening, watching the children play together. "Word spreads. People will hear there's a place where you can make a go of it if you're willing to work." "Is that what we're becoming?" Carl asked. "A destination?" "Maybe," Victor said. "Or maybe just a group of people stubborn enough to stay." Spring planting that year was different. 2 families working together, sharing knowledge and labor. When Victor's plow broke, Carl had the tools to fix it. When Martha's seeds failed to sprout, Alara had extras. The cooperation wasn't always smooth. They disagreed on methods, on priorities, on timing, but they worked through it. By summer, a 3rd family had arrived, then a 4th. Not a town, not yet, but the beginning of something. Victor stood on a hill one evening in July, looking down at the scattered homesteads. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys. Children played in the creek that had nearly killed Sarah. Gardens showed green in soil that had seemed impossible to farm 2 years ago. Alara found him there, as she usually did. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That we did this. Not just survived it, but built it. Something real. We had help. The Jensens, the Moores, the Suttons. Started with us, though, with you saying yes to a broke soldier's crazy proposal." Alara smiled. "Not crazy, practical." "Same thing sometimes." She leaned against him, and they stood together watching the sun set over the community they'd accidentally created. "Sarah wants to start a school," Alara said, "teaching the younger children to read and write. She asked if we'd help build a schoolhouse." "A school? We're really becoming a settlement." "Does that bother you?" Victor considered. He'd spent years avoiding people, avoiding connections, avoiding anything that required trust or vulnerability. Now he was at the center of a growing community. "No," he said honestly. "It doesn't bother me. It feels right." Construction on the schoolhouse began in August. It was a community effort, every family contributing labor or materials or both. The building was simple, just one room with rough benches and a slate board, but it represented something larger. The day it opened, 15 children showed up. Sarah stood at the front, nervous but determined, with books they'd pooled together and lessons she'd prepared. Thomas had volunteered to help, teaching the younger children their letters, while Sarah worked with the older ones. Watching him patiently guide a 6-year-old through the alphabet, Victor felt pride so sharp it hurt. These children who'd lost everything had become teachers, leaders, people who gave to others instead of just taking what they needed to survive. That night, Victor found Alara crying quietly outside the cabin. "What's wrong?" he asked, alarmed. "Nothing's wrong." She wiped her eyes. "Everything's right. That's the problem. I keep waiting for it to fall apart, for something to go wrong. But it just keeps getting better." "That scares you." "Terrifies me. We've been in survival mode so long, I don't know how to just live." Victor understood. He felt it too. The constant vigilance, the expectation of disaster, the inability to trust good things to last.
"Maybe we learn together," he said. "Like we learned everything else. Badly at first, better over time." Alara laughed through her tears. "You're using my own words against me." "They were good words." She leaned into him. "I love you, Victor Hale. I need you to know that. Not just grateful love or partnership love, real love, the kind that's permanent." "I know. I love you too. The permanent kind."
They held each other while stars came out overhead, two people who'd started as strangers and become everything to each other. Autumn brought the first real test of their community. A family 3 miles east lost their cabin to fire, everything gone in hours. They stood in the ashes with 3 children and nothing else. The community response was immediate. The Jensens offered temporary shelter. The Moores donated clothes. Victor and Alara contributed food and tools. Within a week, a work party had started building a new cabin. "This is what it's about," Carl said, hammering alongside Victor. "Not just surviving alone, surviving together." The new cabin went up in 10 days. Not fancy, but solid. The family moved in with tears of gratitude. That night, someone suggested they formalize things. Create an actual community agreement. Rules for mutual aid, for shared resources, for resolving disputes. They met in the new schoolhouse, a dozen families now, and hammered out the basics. Nothing fancy, just practical guidelines for how to be neighbors who actually helped each other. Victor found himself nominated as a sort of informal leader. He tried to decline. "I'm not a leader, I'm just a farmer trying to make it work." "That's exactly why you should do it," Martha Jensen said. "You're not looking for power, you're just looking for solutions. That's what we need." He accepted reluctantly, with the understanding that it was temporary, that anyone could challenge his decisions, that leadership here meant service, not authority. Winter came again, their third in the homestead. But this time they faced it as a community. Families checked on each other. Resources were shared. When the Moore family's food ran low in January, 3 other families contributed what they could spare. It wasn't charity, it was investment. Because everyone understood that helping your neighbors stay alive meant having neighbors to help you when your turn came. The homestead had become something Victor never expected. Not just a place to live, but a place worth protecting, worth building, worth fighting for. In February, on the anniversary of the day Victor had found Sarah and Thomas freezing in the woods, they had a quiet celebration. Just the 4 of them, acknowledging how far they'd come. 2 years, Sarah said, looking around their cabin with its 2 floors, its full pantry, its signs of permanence. 2 years ago we were dying, now we're living. Now we're thriving, Thomas corrected. Big word, Alara teased. Sarah's been teaching me big words. He smiled. But it's true. We're not just getting by anymore. We're actually building something that'll last. Think it will last? Sarah asked. Really? Victor looked at Alara. She looked back. They both knew nothing was certain. Fire, disease, drought, another legal challenge. Any number of things could still destroy what they'd built. But uncertainty wasn't the same as hopelessness. I think we'll fight to make it last, Victor said. That's all anyone can promise. I'll take it, Sarah decided. Spring came early that year, as if apologizing for previous harshness. The snow melted fast, the creek ran full. The land seemed almost eager to cooperate. Planting was a community affair now. Families shared seeds, shared equipment, shared knowledge. What one person had learned through failure could save another from the same mistake. The harvests that fall were better than anyone expected. Not abundant, but solid. Enough to eat, enough to store, even enough to sell some surplus at the settlements. Victor used the profit to buy real glass windows for the cabin. A luxury, but one that felt earned. The first time sunlight streamed through actual glass instead of oiled paper, Alara stood in the beam like she was receiving a blessing. "We made it," she said softly. "We did. Not just survived, actually made it." Victor pulled her close. "You sound surprised." "I am. Shouldn't I be surprised? 2 years ago, we were about to lose everything. 3 years ago, I was a drifter with no purpose. You were a widow with no options. Now look at us." Alara looked. At the cabin with its glass windows, at the land producing food, at the community growing around them, at Sarah teaching school and Thomas learning to be more than his trauma, at this life they'd built from absolutely nothing. "We're rich," she said. Victor laughed. "We're broke. We own more debts than assets." "Not that kind of rich. Rich in what matters. Family, community, purpose. That's wealth no one can take away." She was right. By every practical measure, they were still struggling, still working harder than most people would consider reasonable, still vulnerable to weather and chance and the thousand things that could go wrong. But they had each other. They had built something that mattered. They had transformed from survivors into builders, from individuals into a family, from desperate gamblers into people with a stake in the future. That was worth more than money, worth more than easy comfort, worth everything they'd endured to get here. The years that followed weren't easy. There were hard winters and failed crops and conflicts within the growing community. Sarah eventually married a young man from one of the newer families. Thomas took over more of the farming as Victor's body wore down from years of hard labor. Alara became the community's unofficial record keeper and mediator. They got older, as people do. The work got harder, but the life they'd built got richer. More families came. The settlement grew into an actual town, small but functioning. Someone opened a general store. A blacksmith set up shop. A doctor arrived, young and idealistic, willing to work for payment in goods rather than cash. The schoolhouse expanded. The church that eventually got built stood modest but proud at the town's center. Roads connected them to other settlements, to markets, to the wider world they'd once been so isolated from. Through it all, Victor and Alara remained at the heart of things. Not as leaders exactly, but as the original risk-takers. The ones who'd proven it could be done. On their 10th anniversary, measured from that first proposal in a muddy street in Sweetwater, they stood together on the same hill where Victor had first looked down at their struggling homestead. The view had changed. Where once there'd been one rough cabin, now there were dozens. Where there'd been barren land, now fields produced crops. Where there'd been isolation, now there was community. "Was it worth it?" Alara asked. "Every minute, every struggle, every moment we thought we'd fail. Even the fear, the hunger, the times we weren't sure we'd make it, especially those times because they made this," he gestured at the town below, "mean something. We didn't just receive this, we built it, against odds that should have broken us." Alara leaned against him, comfortable and familiar. "We were so young when we started. We were desperate." That too. Desperate and stupid and impossibly stubborn. Victor smiled. Still stubborn. Some things don't change. They watched the sun set over the town that had grown from their determination and desperation. Watched smoke rise from chimneys, people moving through streets, children playing in safety. This was their legacy. Not wealth or fame or power. Just a place where people could build lives worth living. A community that proved you didn't need perfect conditions or unlimited resources to create something meaningful. You just needed willingness to try, stubborn refusal to quit, and people who wouldn't let you fail alone. Sarah and Thomas, adults now, with lives of their own, came to find them as darkness fell. "Getting late," Sarah said. "You should come down before you freeze." "We're fine," Alara said. "You always say that, and we're always right." Thomas smiled, stubborn as ever. Some things don't change, Victor echoed Ilara's words. They walked down together, four people who'd found each other through circumstance and chosen each other through everything that followed. The town lights came on as they descended, warm and welcoming. Inside their cabin, expanded and improved over the years, but still recognizably the same rough structure they'd first built. They settled in for the evening. The same routine they'd followed for a decade. Simple, familiar, sufficient. Victor looked at Ilara across the table where they'd shared thousands of meals, made hundreds of decisions, built a life one choice at a time. No regrets? He asked. None. You? Not one. It was true. They'd suffered, struggled, nearly failed more times than he could count, but they'd also built something that would outlast them. A family. A community. A life that mattered. That was the thing about choosing to build instead of just survive. Building left something behind, something others could use, could learn from, could improve upon. They'd started with nothing but desperation and a willingness to try. They'd ended with everything that actually mattered. Outside, the town settled into evening. People secure in homes, fed and warm, connected to each other through bonds of mutual aid and shared struggle. All of it traceable back to two people who'd refused to accept that circumstances should determine destiny. Victor Hale and Ilara Voss had been discarded by the world, written off as having nothing to offer. But they'd proven something essential about human resilience and determination. Sometimes the unwanted become the necessary. Sometimes the broken build the strongest foundations. Sometimes the people society overlooks are exactly the ones who change everything. They'd rewritten their story, not into something perfect or easy or without cost, but into something real and lasting and worth the fighting. And in the end, what more could anyone ask from a life than that it meant something, that it built something, that it proved choosing to try, even when success seemed impossible, was always better than accepting defeat? Victor and Ilara had answered those questions with every day they'd survived and every decision they'd made to keep building instead of surrendering. Their legacy wasn't wealth or fame, it was simpler and more profound. They'd proven that love could grow from practicality, that family could be chosen, that community could be built from nothing by people who simply refused to fail alone, and that the harshest land, the hardest circumstances, the longest odds couldn't stop people determined to make a life worth living. That was their gift to the world they'd helped create. Not perfection, but proof. Proof that starting with nothing didn't mean ending with nothing. Proof that choosing each other, choosing to build, choosing to try even when trying seemed futile, that those choices mattered. They transformed from survivors into builders, from desperate strangers into a family that would endure, from victims of circumstance into architects of their own destiny. And in doing so, they'd given everyone watching, everyone struggling, everyone afraid, everyone unsure if trying was worth the risk, permission to hope. Because if two discarded people could build a life from Montana dust and stubborn determination, then maybe anyone could. Maybe circumstance didn't have to be destiny. Maybe choosing to fight for what you wanted, even when the odds were terrible, was always the right choice. That was the truth Victor and Ilara had proven with their lives. Not that winning was guaranteed, but that trying was always worth it.